Most people don't want the truth. They want comfort wrapped in lies. You've felt it in the silence of your thoughts, in the betrayal of a friend, in the slow erosion of meaning. Nietzsche didn't speak to the polite. He spoke to the broken, the disillusioned, the ones who see the world clearly and feel the weight of that vision. This isn't a gentle stroll through philosophy. This is a reckoning with the raw, unfiltered truths that most spend a lifetime avoiding. For the next 3 hours, we're diving deep into Nietzsche's most unsettling insights, not to disturb you, but to wake you up. If this is your first time on our channel, hit subscribe and drop a comment below telling us which philosopher you'd like us to explore in the next video. Most people are only moral because they are too weak to be dangerous. This idea strikes deep because it questions the very foundation of what we call goodness. Nietzsche, ever the provocateur of herd illusions, believed that morality, especially the kind worshipped by the masses, is not the product of high character, but of incapacity. That is, people don't refrain from evil because they are virtuous, but because they are incapable of carrying it out. A man who has no sword is not peaceful. He's harmless. And there's a world of difference between the two. Peacefulness implies restraint, the conscious holding back of power. Harmlessness implies an absence of power to begin with. Nietzsche's disdain for conventional morality was rooted in this exact illusion. Society praises the lamb for not biting, not realizing the lamb never had fangs in the first place. When someone says, "I would never do that," what they often mean is, "I could never do that." They lack the will, the boldness, or the raw power to act. But morality born from impotence is not true morality. It's fear, dressed up as ethics. Nietzsche saw this everywhere, in religious commandments, in moral crusaders, in those who preach love but seethe with jealousy and resentment. Their morality is not a product of spiritual evolution, but of their inability to impose their will on the world. This is why Nietzsche praised what he called master morality over slave morality. Master morality arises from strength. It creates values based on nobility, courage, and excellence. Slave morality, on the other hand, is born from resentment. It says, "I cannot have what he has, so I will call him evil for having it." It disguises envy as virtue. The weak man does not say, "I am weak." He says, "The strong are cruel." And in doing so, he rewrites the narrative to make his weakness appear as moral superiority. This inversion of values, according to Nietzsche, is the root of much societal decay. Instead of cultivating strength, willpower, and individual greatness, modern morality encourages obedience, conformity, and the suppression of natural instincts. The truly powerful man is taught to apologize for his strength. The bold woman is labeled arrogant. And so society grows tame, externally peaceful, but internally bitter and filled with hidden resentment. Yet true morality, if it is to have meaning, must come after strength. The person who can harm but chooses not to, that is the person worth trusting. This is what Nietzsche hints at when he praises the Übermensch, the one who goes beyond the moral binaries of good and evil and instead creates his own values through will, struggle, and self-overcoming. It's easy to look kind when you're powerless. It's easy to claim patience when you have no other option. But what happens when the same man gains power, influence, and the ability to destroy? Does he still act with restraint? Or does he reveal the true contents of his soul? Nietzsche's brutal truth is this: morality is only admirable when it is chosen, not when it is the only option left. Strength first. Then, and only then, should one decide what not to do with it. The herd hates the individual who dares to stand alone, not because he is wrong, but because he reminds them of everything they've surrendered. In Nietzsche's worldview, the individual who refuses to conform becomes a living threat to the comfortable illusions of the crowd. His independence, his refusal to kneel, his unapologetic way of being, all of it acts like a mirror. And what it reflects back to the herd is unbearable, their own cowardice. The herd exists to protect sameness. It praises unity, but only when that unity means obedience. It rewards the person who echoes the popular opinion, even if that opinion is hollow, misguided, or outright false. And it punishes the dissenter, not for the content of his thought, but for the audacity to think differently. When you stand alone, you are not just different, you are dangerous, because your existence proves that choice was always possible. The herd is made up of people who traded their sovereignty for approval, who stopped asking hard questions because the answers made them uncomfortable. They do not want you to think, they want you to nod. They do not want you to grow, they want you to stay predictable. This is why they will mock, attack, or isolate anyone who steps outside the line. Nietzsche understood that solitude is the price of self-possession. The philosopher, the artist, the visionary, all must be willing to walk alone through valleys of ridicule and misunderstanding. The herd doesn't want to understand you. Understanding would require them to change, and change is painful. It would mean unlearning the very lies that make them feel safe. Even worse, the lone individual shines a light on the mediocrity of collective living. His self-made values expose the emptiness of moral traditions handed down without question. His strength threatens their comfort. His clarity threatens their illusions. And so the herd turns hostile, not in the name of truth, but in the name of preservation. They will call him arrogant for speaking freely, call him dangerous for refusing to conform, call him mad for rejecting the narratives they live by. But the truth is simpler. He is a reminder that they once had wings and chose to crawl. This is why Nietzsche admired figures like Zarathustra, those who retreat into the mountains not to escape, but to elevate. The true individual must first leave the herd behind. Only in solitude can he hear his own voice, free from the noise of the crowd. And only by standing alone can he return, not to follow, but to lead. But leadership, in Nietzsche's sense, is not about power over others. It is about power over oneself. It is about becoming someone who does not beg for validation, someone who does not dilute his truth to avoid offending, someone who would rather be hated for his clarity than loved for his compliance. And so the herd will continue to hate the individual who stands alone, because his freedom reveals their cage, his courage mocks their comfort, and his presence, whether silent or spoken, forces them to confront the one thing they fear most, the truth of their own compromise. Comfort is the silent killer of greatness, not because it hurts, but because it seduces. It whispers promises of safety, ease, and pleasure, while slowly dulling the very instincts that drive growth. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He believed that man's highest potential could only be realized through struggle, risk, and the friction of life, not through luxury or the avoidance of discomfort. Comfort numbs. It lulls ambition to sleep and replaces desire with distraction. A man in comfort no longer seeks the unknown. He seeks the familiar. He stops asking who he could become and starts asking how he can protect what he already has. And so, potential dies, not with a scream, but with a sigh. Greatness demands tension. It demands voluntary suffering, a war against one's own limits, and the rejection of mediocrity as a life philosophy. The problem with comfort is not just that it feels good, it's that it convinces you nothing else is worth chasing. It kills the hunger that makes you hunt for a better version of yourself. Nietzsche believed in the necessity of struggle for self-overcoming. In his concept of the Übermensch, the overman, he proposed a being who rises above societal values, who creates meaning through hardship and stands tall in the chaos of existence. Such a person cannot emerge from a life of padded routines and emotional sedation. He is forged in resistance, sharpened by adversity. What makes comfort so deadly is its invisibility. It rarely feels like decay. It feels like success. It feels like the reward at the end of a long journey. You tell yourself you've earned it, that you deserve to relax. But the truth is, comfort isn't a destination. It's a trap. And the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to leave. This doesn't mean all comfort is evil. It means that unchecked comfort, when pursued as a way of life, leads to stagnation. Physical comfort can lead to neglect of health. Emotional comfort can lead to dependency. Intellectual comfort can lead to dogma. In every case, the absence of challenge breeds atrophy. Nietzsche wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." It wasn't just a statement about pain, it was a celebration of resilience. To grow, you must first strain. To transcend, you must first be tested. The pain is not the enemy. The comfort that prevents you from enduring the pain is. Look at history. No empire rose from peace. No artist was born from boredom. No philosopher was made in a bed of feathers. All greatness, whether in war, creation, or inner transformation, was born in discomfort. Because discomfort demands action. It sharpens thought, clarifies desire, and reveals what comfort conceals, who you really are. So when life gets too easy, when everything feels soft and still, beware. That's not peace, it's sedation. And you weren't made to be sedated. You were made to struggle forward, to reject the slow death of ease, to fight against the gravity of comfort and become something the world cannot ignore. Love is often just a prettier name for control. Not because all love is false, but because most love, as practiced by humans, is tangled in conditions, expectations, and fears of abandonment. Nietzsche looked at love not through the lens of romantic idealism, but through the cold eye of psychological power. He saw it not as a pure offering, but as a transaction, one often hidden beneath flowers, vows, and whispered promises. We say we love people, but what we often mean is, I need you to behave in ways that make me feel secure. And when they don't, when they grow, change, or act independently, we feel betrayed. Why? Because what we called love was really an unspoken contract. You make me feel safe, and in return, I'll give you affection. That's not love. It's possession. It's masked dependency. Nietzsche distrusted all forms of sentimentality that disguised deeper instincts. And love, as society has defined it, is full of disguises. Think of how easily I love you becomes I don't want you to talk to them, or how quickly affection turns to jealousy, how quickly desire turns to control. The fear of loss, the terror of rejection makes people cling tighter, dictate more, and camouflage insecurity with words like, I'm just trying to protect us. But the core of Nietzsche's view is this. If your love is built on the condition that the other must not change, it is not love, it is fear in disguise. True love, if it exists, must grant the other their freedom. It must celebrate their individuality, even if it threatens your ego. But most people can't do that. They want the other person to orbit their emotional needs. They want predictability, loyalty, sameness. They don't want love. They want control wrapped in intimacy. And it's not just romantic. Parents do it to children. Friends do it to friends. I only want what's best for you often means do what I believe is right. Love becomes a tool, a soft cage. Even worse, it becomes moralized. If you don't meet my expectations, I accuse you of being unloving, selfish, disloyal. It's a guilt trap, not a relationship. Nietzsche's remedy was radical honesty. If you love someone, strip away the illusions. Ask yourself, do I want their freedom or their obedience? If they stopped giving you what you want, would you still love them? Could you still love them if they outgrew your needs? That is the real test. In his writings, Nietzsche often warned against merging too much with others. He believed that dependence, even in love, compromises the soul. When you define your happiness by another's behavior, you surrender your power. And where power is surrendered, resentment grows. Resentment leads to control. And control kills what love was supposed to be in the first place. Love, at its highest, is not about holding, it's about witnessing. Not about molding, but admiring from a distance, even when the other changes. But such love is rare. Most people aren't looking for soulmates. They're looking for servants who smile. And so what we call love, more often than not, is just a prettier name for control. People don't want truth. They want anesthesia. They want to feel like they know the truth without having to carry the burden of it. Nietzsche understood this deeply. The human psyche craves comfort over clarity. It prefers illusion over confrontation. Not because people are stupid, but because they're tired. The truth is rarely soft. It doesn't cradle you. It exposes you. It rips through illusions, upends identities, and demands action. Most aren't ready for that. What they want instead is the feeling of insight without the consequences of awareness. Truth is heavy. It demands the death of old selves, the sacrifice of inherited beliefs, and the courage to walk alone in a world of false consensus. It forces you to see what you've ignored, to admit you've been wrong, and to acknowledge that most of what surrounds you, education, politics, even love, has been tainted by narratives designed to soothe, not awaken. That's not a comfortable realization. So instead, people reach for psychological Novocaine, distractions, ideologies, ideologues, influencers who tell it like it is, as long as it doesn't cost the audience their worldview. Nietzsche was not just a philosopher. He was a destroyer of illusions. He understood that truth often feels like violence to those who live in self-deception. That's why he didn't flatter the masses. He wrote for those willing to bleed for clarity, and he saw that religion, morality, even philosophy itself, when corrupted, became tools of anesthesia. They pacified the soul, not sharpened it. They told people they were good, loved, and chosen, not because they were, but because those lies made obedience easier. Modernity has not escaped this pattern. If anything, it's refined it. Today, anesthesia comes in more seductive forms. Entertainment that reinforces your worldview, social media echo chambers, therapy that validates without challenging, spirituality that soothes without transforming. People don't want to be confronted. They want to be comforted. They want therapists to say, it's not your fault, pastors to say, you're forgiven, politicians to say, you're the victim, and influencers to say, you're already enough. But the truth, the real, raw, painful truth, that requires confrontation with the self. Nietzsche would argue, if your truth never wounds you, it's probably not truth. Real truth offends your ego before it sets you free. It dissolves your illusions, your convenient narratives, and your scapegoats. It demands that you stop blaming the world and start examining your complicity in your own misery. That's not what most people sign up for. So they trade truth for anesthesia, smiling lies that let them sleep. They mock those who wake up. They avoid those who speak plainly. They label them arrogant, cruel, or dangerous. Because deep down, they know once truth enters the room, the game is over. The mask slips, the comfort dies, and with it the illusion of safety. But Nietzsche's point was never to shame the anesthetized, it was to challenge them, to ask, what would you become if you stopped running from what is? Because while anesthesia keeps you comfortable, it also keeps you small. And truth, though painful, is the only path to becoming fully awake, fully alive. Weakness will disguise itself as virtue to avoid confrontation. It doesn't announce itself honestly. It wears a mask, one that looks like humility, patience, or kindness. But beneath the mask lies avoidance, fear, and the quiet terror of standing one's ground. Nietzsche saw this pattern not as a moral failing, but as a strategic survival mechanism. When someone lacks strength, physical, intellectual, emotional, they often retreat behind moral language to shield their impotence from scrutiny. Instead of admitting, "I'm afraid to challenge this," they say, "I'm above such conflict." Instead of saying, "I lack the will to change," they say, "I've chosen to accept things as they are." This isn't virtue. It's camouflaged surrender. And it's everywhere, on social media, in relationships, in politics, in spirituality. People cloak their inaction in moral superiority. But what they're really doing is dodging the battlefield of life by pretending they're too noble to fight. This is especially common in those who have been taught that confrontation is bad or unkind. Instead of learning how to face challenge with clarity and courage, they label confrontation as negative energy or toxic behavior. They praise themselves for walking away, but often it's not from wisdom. It's from fear of losing. They don't want the discomfort of standing up, so they kneel and call it grace. Nietzsche believed that strength isn't just about domination. It's about honesty. A strong person admits when they're afraid, but doesn't let fear dictate their behavior. A weak person avoids fear entirely and pretends it's virtue. This is the essence of what he called slave morality, a system where the powerless redefine their weakness as goodness. Power becomes evil, defenselessness becomes purity. And instead of aspiring to strength, people demonize it. This inversion corrupts culture over time. It lowers the bar for what is admirable. It teaches children that being liked is more important than being principled. It encourages leaders to be inoffensive rather than courageous. It tells us to avoid conflict at all costs, even if the cost is self-respect. The result? A society of people trained to hide behind polite language while rotting from the inside with unspoken resentment and unrealized potential. Virtue, if it is real, must be chosen from a place of power. Kindness has meaning when you have the option to be cruel. Forgiveness is profound when vengeance is within your reach. Patience matters when you could act, but decide to wait. Anything else is not virtue. It's incapacity dressed in noble words. This is why Nietzsche respected the warrior, the philosopher, the creator, the one who confronts life, who risks failure and criticism, who speaks truth even when it's unpopular. These are not comfortable roles. They require strength. And they expose the weakness of those who hide behind slogans of peace while quietly hoping someone else will do the hard work of truth. So the next time someone parades their virtue, ask yourself, is this the product of power restrained? Or is it weakness afraid to show its face? The answer will tell you everything about the character behind the mask. Some suffer not from failure, but from never daring. Their pain is not born from defeat, but from a life spent avoiding the possibility of it. Nietzsche understood this subtle torment well. He saw it in the faces of the obedient, the careful, the perfectly reasonable. These are the people who did everything right, yet feel hollow. Why? Because they never lived. They merely avoided death. To fail is to try. It is to stake something of yourself, your pride, your name, your dream, on the uncertain. Failure hurts, yes, but it also confirms that you had the courage to enter the arena. It proves you were awake enough to want something. Those who never dare, on the other hand, avoid the pain of defeat, but suffer a deeper, longer wound, regret. Not the regret of a lost battle, but of a battle never fought. The tragedy is that this form of suffering hides itself well. It doesn't show up in headlines or hospital reports. It manifests as quiet dissatisfaction, as envy toward those who risk, as passive aggression, as over-attachment to routine. These are the symptoms of a life unlived, one where the person was so afraid of falling they never climbed. Nietzsche believed in the value of danger, not for its own sake, but because danger refines the soul. Risk clarifies what matters. It forces decisions, strips illusions, and demands presence. To dare is to assert that your life is worth the tension of uncertainty. And those who never dare send a different message to the world. I do not believe I can endure discomfort. I would rather be safe than free. But safety, over time, becomes a kind of prison. The bars are built from habits, expectations, and self-limiting beliefs. No one puts them there, except you. And yet you cling to them because the alternative is terrifying. What if you try and fail? What if people laugh? What if you lose what little certainty you have? But Nietzsche would ask, what if you win? What if you become? Without daring, there is no becoming. Only repetition, a loop of days disguised as a life, a slow erosion of the spirit. You don't just avoid failure, you avoid the only thing that ever made life worth enduring, the pursuit of something larger than yourself. And here lies the paradox. The pain of failure is acute, but it passes. The pain of never daring is chronic. It lingers. It doesn't scream. It whispers, "This isn't who you were meant to be." And over time, those whispers grow louder than any applause comfort could have ever given you. The world belongs to those who dare, not because they are special, but because they are willing. Willing to lose, willing to look foolish, willing to begin again. And in that willingness, they become something the timid never will. It's alive. So when you find yourself envying those who move fast, speak loudly, or dream without apology, ask yourself, is your suffering from what you tried and lost, or from what you never had the courage to reach for in the first place? For many, it is the latter. Not failure, but fear is the wound that never heals. The desire to be liked is the death of authenticity. It starts subtly, adjusting your tone, softening your opinions, nodding when you disagree, all in the name of being nice. But with each compromise, each performance, you move further from who you truly are. Nietzsche warned against this because he saw it as the slow surrender of the self. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in thousands of small, socially acceptable betrayals. Wanting to be liked is natural. We're social creatures. Acceptance once meant survival. But today, the stakes have changed, and yet the instinct remains. People contort themselves into versions that others will approve of, not because it makes them happy, but because it avoids rejection. The problem is, every time you prioritize being liked, you deprioritize being true. And the further you get from truth, the more you begin to vanish from your own life. Authenticity isn't about being loud or controversial. It's about alignment, saying what you actually believe, choosing what you actually want, and standing in your own values, even when it costs you. But in a culture obsessed with validation, likes, shares, applause, authenticity becomes a liability. It's seen as too risky, too blunt, too much. So people shrink themselves. They don't lie. They edit. They become palatable, not powerful. Nietzsche believed that this was one of the greatest threats to individuality. When a person lives only for approval, they become a reflection of others' preferences. They lose the edge of their thinking. They speak in pre-approved language. They believe in whatever is popular, safe, or easy. And in doing so, they erase their uniqueness, the one thing they truly had to offer the world. This desire to be liked isn't just self-sabotage. It's social control, Societies don't need chains when they have expectations. People learn to censor themselves before anyone else has to. They internalize the voice of the crowd. They become their own jailer. And the punishment for breaking free? Rejection, discomfort, disapproval. But Nietzsche would argue, so what? Better to be rejected for being real than accepted for being a copy. The irony is that people claim to admire authenticity. But what they usually mean is sanitized authenticity, just enough uniqueness to be interesting, but not enough to be threatening. Truly authentic people disrupt. They challenge. They make others uncomfortable. Because their existence forces a question. If they can be free, why can't I? That's what makes them powerful and dangerous. To live authentically is to accept that not everyone will like you. In fact, some will resent you. But those who matter, the ones with real depth, will recognize you. They'll see in your truth a permission slip for their own. And in a world addicted to performance, that's rare. That's real. So the next time you feel the urge to please, ask yourself, am I being true or just being liked? Because those two roads rarely lead to the same destination. One leads to applause. The other leads to freedom. Nietzsche knew which was worth the cost. Cowards build religions of obedience. Thinkers destroy them. This isn't just about theology. It's about systems of belief, of control, of unquestioned rules that turn men into servants rather than sovereigns. Nietzsche saw through the architecture of these systems. To him, religion, when hijacked by fear, becomes a tool not for enlightenment, but for subjugation. Not all belief systems are born in cowardice, but those rooted in obedience above inquiry often are. Cowards fear uncertainty. They fear moral ambiguity. They fear responsibility for their own choices. And so they build doctrines, rigid, eternal, unchallengeable. Do this, not that. Think this, not that. Obey, and you are good. Question, and you are lost. These systems offer comfort, but at a steep price. The death of thought. They don't elevate man, they sedate him. To Nietzsche, this form of religion wasn't about connecting to the divine. It was about avoiding the terrifying freedom of choice. It was easier to outsource morality to a priest, a book, or a commandment than to wrestle with your own conscience. Obedience, then, becomes a virtue not because it is noble, but because it's easy to mass-produce. It makes society manageable. It rewards compliance and punishes deviation, not on the grounds of logic, but on the authority of tradition. But thinkers, real thinkers, do not kneel. They interrogate. They take a scalpel to the sacred. They aren't content with inherited beliefs. They want to know what's behind the curtain. And when they pull it back, what they often find is not God, but fear masquerading as holiness. They see how doctrines are crafted to maintain hierarchy, how guilt is engineered to suppress rebellion, how truth is enforced not with reason but with threat. Nietzsche didn't advocate for mindless destruction of belief. He advocated for the reconstruction of it. He wanted man to become the author of his values, to create a morality not rooted in fear of punishment, but in a deep personal confrontation with life's chaos. He called this self-overcoming, and it cannot occur in the prison of blind obedience. Cowards need systems that tell them what to do. Thinkers need systems that challenge what they know. And the tension between these two types has shaped civilizations. Every prophet, philosopher, or heretic who questioned authority was met with resistance not just from the rulers, but from the ruled. Because many people don't want freedom. They want familiar chains. Religions of obedience are stable, predictable. They offer the illusion of certainty. But they rot from within. They produce followers, not leaders. Echoes, not voices. Thinkers, on the other hand, light dangerous fires. They break the spell. They force people to confront uncomfortable truths. That morality is not handed down, it's wrestled with. That truth is not inherited, it's earned. And that the path to meaning is not through obedience, but through becoming. So yes, cowards build religions of obedience, because control feels safer than thought. But thinkers destroy them, not out of hatred, but because truth demands it. And in the rubble of the old, they build something far more sacred, freedom of the mind. Pity is used by the weak to manipulate the strong. It sounds harsh because we're trained to see pity as noble, an expression of compassion, a virtue. But Nietzsche saw a darker undercurrent, the strategic use of pity as a weapon, not a weapon of the strong, but of the weak who lack other forms of power. When you cannot dominate through strength, reason, or truth, you can dominate through guilt, and pity is the perfect tool for that. Weakness, when paired with cunning, doesn't beg for respect. It begs for protection. It draws out sympathy and then uses that sympathy to control. You see it in personal relationships, where one person constantly plays the victim to avoid accountability. You see it in institutions where guilt becomes a currency. The more someone suffers or claims to, the more moral authority they are granted. And that moral authority can be wielded to silence, shame, or steer others. This is not to deny that real suffering exists. Nietzsche never mocked genuine pain, but he did challenge the way suffering is used. He saw how entire belief systems could be built on the glorification of the weak, where pain is transformed into leverage. And he warned that when you allow the suffering of others to become the measure of truth, you surrender power not to justice, but to manipulation. Pity becomes manipulation when it demands obedience. When it says, "Because I hurt, you must give in. Because I struggle, you must sacrifice." It uses emotion to bypass logic. It demands that strength kneel, not because it is wrong, but because weakness makes it feel guilty. And the truly dangerous part? It often works. Strong people are often driven by conscience. They feel responsibility. They want to help. And that's precisely what makes them vulnerable to being manipulated by those who have nothing but victimhood to offer. The weak cry out, not always for healing, but for control. They use pity like a leash, to guide, to restrict, to lead the strong into self-sacrifice. Nietzsche called this a form of slave morality, a value system where the powerless define goodness in a way that protects themselves. In this system, strength becomes cruelty. Independence becomes selfishness. And the highest virtue is not courage, but suffering. The more you suffer, the more holy you become. But this inversion of values isn't noble. It's strategic. It's how the weak stay influential without ever rising above their condition. True strength, according to Nietzsche, is not heartless. It sees suffering, but refuses to be ruled by it. It helps, but it does not submit. It recognizes the line between compassion and control. Because when pity becomes the basis for truth, excellence dies, progress stalls, and civilization begins to cater not to its best ideas, but to its loudest wounds. Pity can be human, but when it becomes a tactic, when it's used to extract, manipulate, and weaken, it must be seen for what it is, the last defense of those who refuse to rise and instead demand that others fall. Most relationships are built on mutual lies, not always malicious ones, but necessary ones. Lies that grease the gears of connection, smooth over the rough edges of truth, and keep both people from having to confront the inconvenient realities hiding beneath the surface. Nietzsche, ever the unmasker, would argue that what most call love or intimacy is often a carefully negotiated illusion, not a meeting of souls, but a silent pact. You won't expose my weaknesses, and I won't expose yours. People don't fall in love with each other's truth. They fall in love with each other's performance, the charm, the restraint, the curated vulnerability. In the early stages, it's all theater. You present your most likable self, hiding the messier parts, your jealousy, your resentment, your unresolved trauma. They do the same. And for a time, both sides believe in the illusion, not because they're deceived, but because they want to be. What happens when the masks slip, when the silences start to speak louder than the words? That's when the real reckoning begins. But by then, many have already constructed a relationship built not on reality, but on strategic omissions. They lie about how happy they are. They lie about what they want. They lie about how much they've forgiven, not to be cruel, but to keep the structure intact, because the truth, if spoken, would shatter it. Nietzsche believed that truth was explosive, that to be fully honest with another human being requires an almost inhuman level of strength. And that's rare. Most people don't want truth in their relationships. They want stability. They want to avoid chaos, preserve identity, avoid the discomfort of hard conversations. So they adopt mutual lies. I'm fine. This is enough. I trust you. Lies that protect the status quo, even as they corrode authenticity. Even love itself can become a lie. People say, I love you when they mean, I need you. They say, I forgive you when they mean, I'm afraid to lose you. And sometimes they stay not out of devotion, but because leaving would mean confronting the reality that they've wasted years pretending. The lie becomes easier to live with than the truth ever could be. This isn't just romantic. It happens in friendships, in families, even between parent and child. There's a silent agreement. Don't ask, don't tell, let's pretend. The more invested people become in each other's company, the harder it is to speak honestly, because the risk of rupture grows too great. And so the relationship becomes a museum of polite deceptions. Nietzsche wasn't suggesting we should become cruel or brutally honest at all times. He understood the social function of lies. But he challenged the idea that relationships built on these lies could ever lead to real growth. To him, the highest form of connection is not safety, it's transformation. And that can only happen when both people are willing to destroy the illusion for the sake of something more powerful, the raw, unfiltered, inconvenient truth. But few dare. So most settle, and call the illusion love. Truth doesn't heal, it burns. It doesn't arrive gently, like a remedy. It strikes like lightning, without apology, and leaves behind the smoldering remains of whatever you thought was real. Nietzsche knew that truth was never meant to be comfortable. Its purpose isn't to soothe, but to awaken, and that awakening is almost always violent. We are taught to treat truth like medicine, something that will eventually make us feel better. But truth, in its rawest form, doesn't feel good. It feels like betrayal, like disillusionment, like standing barefoot in the ashes of your former life. That's because truth doesn't work around your identity. It destroys whatever was built on illusion. If you're clinging to a lie about who you are, who they are, or how the world works, then the truth must first set fire to everything false. Only then can anything authentic emerge. People often say, I just want the truth. But what they usually mean is, I want a truth that doesn't hurt me. They want clarity without consequences. But real truth is merciless. It exposes hidden motives. It unmasks comfortable delusions. It reveals the cost of your avoidance. And in doing so, it forces you to confront the most painful thing of all, your own role in the lie. Nietzsche never saw truth as a passive revelation. He saw it as an act of destruction. He believed that to know the truth is to suffer, not because truth is inherently cruel, but because we are deeply invested in avoiding it. Our beliefs, our attachments, our stories, all are designed to keep us safe from the unfiltered, often brutal nature of reality. So when truth finally arrives, it doesn't heal, It incinerates. And yet there's something sacred in that burn. Because only through that fire can anything real be born. Truth doesn't offer peace, but it creates space. The space for something new, something earned, something unshakable. But that space comes at a cost. You must watch your illusions die. You must grieve the version of yourself that needed them. You must stand naked in front of the void and choose to build again, not from comfort, but from clarity. This is why people often hate the truth-teller, because he brings the fire. He's not interested in making others feel better. He's interested in showing them what they refuse to see. And the more deeply someone is attached to their illusion, the more violently they react to its exposure. The truth-teller becomes the enemy, not because he's wrong, but because he's right in a way that can no longer be ignored. So no, truth doesn't heal in the traditional sense. It wounds, it scars, it strips. But through that destruction, something more powerful becomes possible. Transformation. Not the kind that preserves who you've been, but the kind that requires you to become someone entirely new. Truth demands this from you, not because it is cruel, but because it refuses to settle for anything less than what is real. And real is never painless. People follow rules only until no one's watching. This is the uncomfortable truth about human morality. It's often performative. Society likes to pretend that ethics are internal, that people do what's right because they believe in it. But Nietzsche saw through this illusion. He understood that for most people, morality is conditional. It's a set of behaviors enforced by eyes, consequences, and the fear of social exclusion, not a reflection of inner principle. Rules are effective not because they change the soul, but because they install a surveillance mechanism, external or internal, that keeps behavior in line. Cameras, social norms, reputations, laws, these are the invisible guards. The moment they disappear, many people revert to impulse, to self-interest, to whatever they can get away with. Not because they've turned evil, but because the rule was never truly theirs to begin with. It was borrowed, imposed, followed out of fear, rather than conviction. This is what Nietzsche meant when he criticized herd morality. It's not that people are inherently evil, it's that they're conditioned. They're taught to follow rules like sheep follow the shepherd, not out of understanding, but out of habit. Remove the shepherd, and chaos often follows. The rules were never absorbed into the person's identity. They were simply part of the environment. Think about how behavior shifts in anonymity. Online, where names and faces are hidden, cruelty spikes. In war, where normal laws are suspended, people commit atrocities. In the privacy of closed rooms, behind closed doors, or under the protection of power, individuals often show who they truly are, not the rule followers, but the rule breakers given the chance. This isn't aberration, it's exposure. It reveals what was always there, behavior shaped by pressure, not principle. Nietzsche challenged people to create their own values precisely because of this. He believed that if your morality is dependent on surveillance, it isn't morality. It's obedience. And obedience, while useful to maintain order, does not make someone virtuous. A truly moral person behaves with integrity even in isolation. They don't need witnesses to do what's right. Their values are forged through struggle, contemplation, and self-overcoming, not dictated by fear of punishment. The danger of a society built on performative ethics is that it looks good on the surface, but collapses when pressure is applied, when the cameras fail, when the leader is removed, when the crisis hits. That's when people's true nature is revealed. And often, it's not noble, it's opportunistic. Nietzsche didn't see this as a reason for despair, but a call to deeper self-examination. He believed the individual must be strong enough to govern themselves, to be their own watcher. To follow rules only when watched is to live under the illusion of virtue, It's a borrowed conscience, and as soon as the eyes vanish, so does the facade. True character begins where surveillance ends, and until a person reaches that level of internal alignment where action flows from deeply rooted values, they are not yet free. They are still a product of the crowd, shaped by fear, not by truth. Strength is lonely because it doesn't beg for applause. It doesn't perform. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't wait for permission or recognition. And in a world addicted to validation, this makes true strength both alien and threatening. Nietzsche admired this kind of strength, the kind that walks alone, unmoved by opinion, unshaken by rejection. Because the highest form of power, he believed, is internal. It is silent. It is sovereign. Most people aren't comfortable with solitude. They need mirrors, people to reflect their worth back to them, to confirm that they are seen, accepted, understood. And so their strength is borrowed. It exists only as long as there is applause. Take away the crowd, and the performance stops. Take away approval, and confidence withers. But real strength doesn't flinch in silence. It keeps going, whether praised or condemned. That kind of strength is lonely, because it does not seek agreement. It speaks the truth even when the truth is unwanted. It does what is right even when it is unpopular. It says no when others expect yes. And in doing so, it often finds itself standing alone. Not because it wants to be, but because the cost of integrity is isolation. And yet the strong endure it. They do not dilute themselves to fit into rooms too small for their vision. Applause is addictive. It feels like love. It feels like proof. But Nietzsche warned it that chasing applause corrupts the soul. It teaches you to ask, will they approve, instead of, is this true? And once your actions depend on approval, you're no longer strong. You're obedient. You become a slave to the crowd, even if the crowd loves you. The strongest individuals are often misunderstood. Their silence is read as arrogance. Their independence is mistaken for coldness. Their refusal to conform is labeled rebellion. But in truth, they are simply unwilling to compromise what matters. They would rather be hated for standing alone than loved for pretending. And that refusal, to pretend, to pander, to explain, is what makes them rare. Strength that begs for applause is not strength, it's performance. It might look powerful, but it is fragile underneath. It needs noise to feel alive. But strength that stands in silence, that endures misunderstanding, rejection, exile, that is unbreakable. That is real. This is why Nietzsche valued the idea of the Übermensch, the one who creates values rather than inherits them. Such a person cannot live for the applause of others. Their compass is internal. Their reward is not praise, but becoming. And becoming, in its deepest form, requires the ability to walk alone. To say, I know what I am, even if you don't understand it. So yes, strength is lonely, because it doesn't explain itself. It doesn't shout for attention. It builds in silence. It waits. And when it moves, it does so without fanfare. Not to be seen, but because it must. Because it is compelled by something deeper than approval, the necessity to be true, no matter the cost. Most men are not husbands. They are prisoners in invisible cages, bound not by chains, but by expectations. Caged not by walls, but by silent compromises and societal scripts that slowly drain their vitality. Nietzsche would argue that the institution of marriage, as practiced by most, isn't a union of strength and freedom. It's a contract of conformity, a spiritual domestication. Not because commitment is inherently corrupt, but because the modern idea of husbandhood is so often reduced to obedience, suppression, and sacrifice without meaning. A man enters marriage believing he is gaining a partner, but too often what he inherits is a list of unspoken rules. Don't think too much, Don't feel too deeply, don't dream too far. Trade your ambition for routine. Trade your edge for predictability. Be strong, but never intimidating. Be honest, but never too honest. Be free, but never disobedient. And slowly, over time, many men stop being. They become functions, providers, protectors, peacekeepers, silent, predictable, tame. These invisible cages are rarely spoken of. They are too embedded in the culture. A good husband is expected to sacrifice for the family, his dreams, his solitude, sometimes even his identity. And while sacrifice in itself can be noble, Nietzsche questioned sacrifices made unconsciously, without critical thought. He warned against moralities that celebrate suffering as virtue without questioning its purpose. When sacrifice becomes expectation rather than choice, it ceases to be meaningful. It becomes servitude. What's more insidious is how these cages are decorated with praise. The man who suppresses his desire is mature. The man who doesn't complain is strong. The man who accepts a diminished life for the sake of stability is admirable. But inside, many of these men are spiritually hollow, drifting, disconnected, numb. They haven't partnered with someone. They've become someone else's structure. And they can't name the problem because the world keeps telling them they should be proud of the bars. Nietzsche's remedy was not cynicism toward love or partnership, but a deeper challenge. Can two people come together without imprisoning each other? Can a man remain a sovereign being within the bond of marriage? Can love be built on mutual freedom, not mutual limitation? That requires strength from both partners and from society to reject the convenient lie that love requires self-erasure. Many men feel trapped not because of their partners, but because they were never taught how to enter a relationship as a whole, conscious individual. They followed the script. They believed being needed was the same as being loved. And by the time they wake up, if they ever do, they've already surrendered their essence to the role. To be a husband should not mean to be caged. It should mean standing beside someone in truth, not beneath someone in duty. But until men learn to break the invisible contracts they never consciously signed, they will remain prisoners, smiling, providing, enduring, while their authentic self waits quietly behind the bars, wondering when it became a ghost in its own life. Obedience is rewarded. Questioning is punished. This is the unwritten law of most institutions, schools, religions, corporations, and even families. From a young age, people are trained not to think, but to comply. Praise is given to those who follow the rules, who color inside the lines, who nod and smile and repeat what they're told. Meanwhile, those who ask, why? Those who dare to deviate, challenge, or rethink are seen as disruptive, disloyal, or dangerous. Nietzsche saw this mechanism clearly. He believed that modern morality and social order were not designed to elevate the strong or the wise, but to keep the system intact. And systems survive through obedience, not originality. That's why conformity is celebrated, because it ensures predictability. It keeps people manageable. It maintains the illusion that everything is under control. In the classroom, the obedient child is the good student. They raise their hand, recite the textbook, never question the authority of the teacher. The child who asks too many questions is labeled difficult, rebellious, even disrespectful. Not because the questions are wrong, but because they disrupt the flow. They make others uncomfortable. They threaten the fragile structure built on unexamined beliefs. In workplaces, the same pattern unfolds. The employee who follows orders, avoids confrontation, and keeps their head down often advances faster than the one who questions inefficient systems or speaks truth to power. Managers don't want thinkers. They want implementers, people who execute, not people who challenge the foundations of what's being built. Even in relationships, obedience is often mistaken for love. The partner who yields is seen as loyal. The one who questions, who insists on growth, who challenges the other to evolve, is labeled difficult. But Nietzsche would argue that this kind of obedience isn't love, it's surrender. It's the slow death of the soul in exchange for comfort and validation. Questioning is punished because it forces people to confront what they've been avoiding. It shakes the ground beneath inherited beliefs. It pulls back the curtain and reveals that many rules are upheld not by truth, but by tradition. And when those rules are questioned, people feel exposed. So rather than examine the question, they attack the questioner. But the cost of this dynamic is profound. Societies that reward obedience over critical thought become intellectually stagnant. They produce followers, not leaders, imitators, not creators. And over time, the collective mind dulls. Innovation dies. Truth is replaced with consensus. And those who might have pulled humanity forward are silenced before they begin. Nietzsche called for the rise of the individual who does not obey by default, the one who questions not out of rebellion, but out of a desire to understand, the one who refuses to be tamed by rewards or intimidated by punishment. This kind of person threatens every system built on submission, but they are the ones who ignite real progress. So while obedience is rewarded with comfort, status, and acceptance, it comes at the cost of your own clarity. Questioning may bring exile, discomfort, or conflict, but it also brings vision. And only the courageous ever choose that path. The oppressed often become the cruelest rulers. It's a pattern that repeats throughout history, not as an accident, but as a psychological inevitability. Nietzsche understood this dynamic intimately. He warned that those who suffer under tyranny, once given power, rarely seek justice. They seek revenge, not because they are inherently evil, but because their identity has been built around pain. And when pain is your foundation, cruelty becomes your language of power. Oppression doesn't just break the body, it warps the soul. It teaches helplessness, breeds resentment, and festers with unexpressed rage. Over time, the oppressed develop a deep need not only to escape their suffering, but to reverse it. They don't just want freedom, they want dominance. They want the feeling of control that was once denied to them. And when that moment arrives, when the tables turn, their empathy often disappears. The victim becomes the punisher. Nietzsche saw this clearly in what he called slave morality. When people who have long been powerless finally gain power, they often frame their vengeance as virtue. They justify cruelty by pointing to past suffering. We were abused, so now we are justified in abusing. The moral high ground is claimed not through goodness, but through historical victimhood. It becomes a currency of power, a way to deflect criticism and silence dissent. This is why revolutions often give birth to regimes more brutal than the ones they replaced. The oppressed overthrow their masters only to become masters themselves, harsher, more paranoid, more ruthless. Because their rule is not grounded in vision, it's grounded in grievance. And grievance is a dangerous fuel. It burns hot, fast, and indiscriminately. Nietzsche never denied the reality of injustice, but he challenged the idea that victimhood alone made someone virtuous. He argued that being harmed does not automatically make one good. It only means you were harmed. What you do with that suffering is what defines your character. Will you transform it into wisdom, or will you pass it down, rebranded as righteousness? The cruelest rulers are often those who have waited the longest to take revenge. Their memory is long, their need for power is personal, and because they see themselves as formerly oppressed, they feel above moral scrutiny. I know what pain feels like, they say, so whatever I do now is justified. But it's not. It's just the same cycle in a different costume. True strength is not measured by how you treat your enemies while you're weak, but how you treat them when you're powerful. The one who rises from suffering and still chooses restraint is the rarest kind of leader, but they are outnumbered by those who use their past as a license for cruelty. Nietzsche's warning was not just political, it was psychological. Any person who clings to their identity as the wronged, who refuses to transcend that identity, is vulnerable to becoming a tyrant the moment they taste control. Because unhealed wounds don't disappear, they weaponize, and power simply gives them a bigger stage. Guilt is a weapon crafted by the weak to shackle the powerful. It's not forged with violence or force. It's psychological, emotional, and insidious. Nietzsche saw guilt not as a virtue, but as a tool, a sophisticated way to control those who have strength, autonomy, or vision. Where physical chains once held men in bondage, now guilt binds the mind. It whispers not, "You must obey," but "You are selfish if you do not." At its core, guilt is a strategy. When someone lacks the power to resist, confront, or lead, they often resort to moral leverage. They paint their weakness as goodness, their dependency as virtue, and then they frame the strength of others as a moral failing. How dare you think for yourself? How can you pursue your path while others suffer? These are not ethical questions. They're psychological traps designed to make the strong doubt their right to move forward. Nietzsche understood that guilt doesn't grow in a vacuum. It's cultivated. Institutions use it to ensure compliance. Religions embed it early, teaching children that they are born flawed, that wanting is wrong, and that questioning is sin. Families use it to enforce obedience. And in modern society, guilt is used to demand conformity, to make people feel bad for having boundaries, for succeeding, for not carrying the emotional weight of others. The reason guilt is so effective is because it targets the conscience of the powerful. It assumes they have empathy and turns that empathy against them. The strong begin to hesitate. They shrink themselves so others won't feel small. They sacrifice their vision so no one feels left behind. And over time, they internalize the belief that their strength is a problem, not a gift. This is slave morality at its peak, a value system that redefines virtue around helplessness. In this moral framework, the good person is not the brave, but the obedient, not the builder, but the caretaker. The one who denies his own desire in service of others is praised. The one who pursues his will is condemned as arrogant, greedy, or cruel. But Nietzsche offers an antidote. Transcend guilt, not by becoming heartless, but by becoming clear. The truly strong must ask themselves, is this guilt legitimate or is it a leash? Am I being called to higher responsibility or am I being manipulated into self-sacrifice? True morality is chosen, not imposed. If it comes with guilt instead of clarity, it likely serves someone else's agenda. To break free from the weapon of guilt is to reclaim your power, not to ignore others, but to lead without apology. Because the world doesn't need more guilty minds, it needs bold ones. Minds that can think, act, create. And guilt, when unchecked, kills that boldness. It convinces lions they should apologize for their roar. So when guilt arises, examine its source. Does it ask you to be better or smaller? If it's the latter, it's not morality. It's control. And it was never yours to carry. The will to power is stronger than the will to love. This is not a cynical view of human nature. It's a penetrating observation of how people truly behave beneath the surface of their idealism. Nietzsche understood that the deepest human drive is not for connection, not even for affection, but for control over the self, the environment, and others. Love may seem like the nobler instinct, but time and again it is bent, twisted, or sacrificed in the service of power. The will to power is not merely about domination or politics. It's the urge to expand, to assert, to shape reality according to one's own values. It manifests in ambition, creativity, rebellion, conquest, and even in spiritual transcendence. It is the force behind all becoming. Love, while deeply human, often becomes a tool or casualty of that force. People love, but more often than not, they love with conditions, expectations, and unconscious demands. Why? Because even in love, they are still seeking power. Romantic love is filled with examples. People say they want connection, but what they often desire is possession, predictability, control over how the other behaves. They want love, but only on terms that reinforce their emotional security. The moment that love threatens to make them feel vulnerable, powerless, or replaceable, the will to power takes over. They pull away, they lash out, they attempt to reshape the relationship to fit their comfort zone. Even altruistic love is not immune. Acts of charity, sacrifice, and forgiveness are often entangled with the subtle pursuit of moral superiority. I forgive you can be an expression of grace, but it can also be a power play. A way to rise above someone, to declare oneself the bigger person. Nietzsche would argue that these are not failures of character, they're revelations of motive. Power is always operating, even under the skin of love. This is why love alone cannot sustain a relationship, a family, or a society. Without the conscious management of power dynamics, love will be used, drained, or corrupted. People don't just want to be loved, they want to be needed, to be admired, to feel essential. These are not expressions of love, they are expressions of power. And when those feelings are threatened, people will sabotage love to regain control. Nietzsche saw that the will to power is not inherently evil. It is the driving force of life. But it must be acknowledged, not denied. Those who pretend they are purely motivated by love often blind themselves to their true intentions. And in that blindness, they cause harm, manipulating in the name of care, controlling in the name of concern, wounding in the name of protection. To transcend this, one must recognize the will to power within themselves. To become aware of when love is being used as a leash or shield. Only then can love become real, free, honest, and uncorrupted. But make no mistake, when the two instincts collide, the will to power is stronger. It will bend love to its purpose unless one consciously chooses otherwise. That is the burden and the possibility of becoming fully human. People don't forgive, they forget, until they need revenge. Forgiveness is often praised as a moral virtue, a cleansing act of the soul, a sign of spiritual maturity. But Nietzsche would argue otherwise. He would say that what most call forgiveness is merely the absence of necessity, the quiet lapse of memory when revenge no longer serves a purpose. True forgiveness, the kind that transforms resentment into peace, is rare. What's far more common is forgetfulness, a forgetting that wears the mask of forgiveness. This is because true forgiveness requires strength, emotional sovereignty, a deep understanding of self, and a deliberate release of the will to retaliate. But most people don't possess this strength. They suppress, not transcend. They push the offense into the background of the mind, not because they've healed, but because remembering is inconvenient. As long as the offense does not affect their current reality, it's easier to pretend to forgive than to confront the pain or admit the lingering bitterness. But pain has a memory, and that memory doesn't always fade. It hides. It embeds itself in the unconscious, waiting for a moment of power imbalance. The moment someone gains an upper hand or the opportunity presents itself, the memory resurfaces, sharp, vivid, charged. That's when forgiveness reveals itself to be a lie. Revenge, long dormant, emerges with renewed energy. The desire to strike is no longer buried, it is justified. It feels earned. Nietzsche saw revenge not as an act of evil, but as a natural expression of the will to power, an instinct to restore equilibrium, to correct perceived injustice. When someone feels wronged, their inner world becomes unbalanced. If they are powerless at the time, they suppress the urge to retaliate. But the instinct doesn't vanish. It transforms into resentment, a slow, corrosive force that waits. And when the power dynamics shift, so does the response. What was once forgiven is now remembered with intensity, and revenge becomes the means to regain power. This is why Nietzsche distrusted moralities that celebrated forgiveness without examining its origins. Much of what passes as virtue is, in fact, weakness. People forgive not because they are noble, but because they cannot retaliate. They rebrand helplessness as holiness. But as soon as the opportunity for vengeance arises, their true nature is revealed, not as peaceful souls, but as delayed avengers. This truth explains so many quiet betrayals in human relationships, old wounds reopened by new conflicts. A partner bringing up a mistake from years ago, a friend turning cold after decades of unspoken tension. It's not that they ever forgave, they simply forgot until memory became useful again. Revenge, then, is not spontaneous. It is recycled, hurt, strategically awakened. Forgiveness, when it is real, requires conscious confrontation. It demands that a person look directly at the wound, name it, and choose not to carry it forward, not because they must, but because they've transcended the need. Anything less is just emotional delay. And as Nietzsche warned, the will to revenge is patient. It waits in the dark. And when the moment comes, it returns not as forgiveness lost, but as justice long postponed. Morality is a cage, forged by the fearful, not by the noble, not by the wise, but by those terrified of chaos, risk, and the unpredictable nature of human freedom. Nietzsche saw conventional morality as less of a code of truth and more of a security system, a way for the weak to control the strong, for the conformist to restrain the exceptional. It wasn't designed to elevate man, it was designed to contain him. Societies don't build moral systems from pure reason. They build them from fear. Fear of destruction, of rebellion, of unpredictability. And so, moral rules are invented, not discovered, invented, to reduce the threat of difference. The individual who steps outside those rules, no matter how courageous or insightful, is labeled dangerous. Not because he is wrong, but because he makes others feel insecure. He reveals that morality is not eternal law, it is human-made scaffolding, and like all scaffolding, it shakes when someone climbs too high. The fearful, those who lack the will to shape their own values, cling to morality because it gives them the illusion of control. It tells them what is good, what is evil, what is allowed, and what is punishable. But it does not ask them to think. It asks them to obey. It rewards conformity and punishes self-definition. That's why Nietzsche called it a cage. It's a framework that makes people feel safe while stripping them of their creative power. Most people don't follow morality because they've deeply examined it. They follow it because it was handed to them by parents, teachers, priests, laws, culture. It comes prepackaged. And because questioning it requires effort and risk, most would rather stay in the cage. They decorate it, moralize it, even take pride in it. But it remains a cage. The moment you try to move beyond its boundaries, you're met with resistance, guilt, and judgment, not necessarily because you're doing wrong, but because you're uncontrollable. Nietzsche saw the emergence of what he called slave morality as the triumph of the fearful. In this worldview, humility is praised because it doesn't threaten anyone. Obedience is honored because it keeps the system stable. Meekness is called strength, and strength is labeled cruelty. It's an inversion of values, a moral system built not on excellence, but on protection from excellence. But there is another kind of morality, one that emerges from strength, from introspection, from the individual who has overcome the need for external validation. This is master morality, a code not inherited, but created. It does not seek to restrain life, but to express it fully. It does not fear the wild, raw instincts of man, but channels them toward greatness. Yet to reach this level, one must first break the cage. The fearful built morality to survive. But survival is not the same as living. Nietzsche invites us to go further, to ask, whose values are you living by? Who benefits from your obedience? And more importantly, what would you become if you dared to forge your own code? The cage is strong, but it only exists as long as you believe it's sacred. Once you see it for what it is, a tool, not a truth, you can begin to walk free. And in that freedom, morality is no longer a cage. It becomes a weapon you wield, not a leash that binds. You're only free when you no longer need their approval. This is one of the most profound truths Nietzsche taught about human freedom. The idea that true liberation doesn't come from external conditions, but from internal sovereignty. As long as your sense of worth, your decisions, your happiness depend on the judgment of others, you are not free. You are a prisoner to their opinions, their expectations, their approval. Seeking approval is natural. Humans are social animals wired to connect, belong, and be accepted. For most of history, being rejected by the tribe meant death, so we carry this instinct deeply in our bones. But in modern life, this instinct can become a cage. When your identity is tied to how others see you, you give away your power piece by piece. Your choices become calculated performances. Your desires become diluted. Your voice becomes a whisper, tailored to please. Nietzsche would say this is the opposite of freedom. Freedom is not about doing whatever you want. It's about being whatever you are, regardless of the consequences. It's about having the strength to stand alone, to face judgment, and to say, "This is me. Take it or leave it." When you need approval, you constantly adjust yourself to fit others' standards. You become a reflection, not a source. This dependence on approval also leads to a kind of emotional exile. You are never fully present because part of you is always monitoring others, watching for signs of acceptance or rejection. You calculate your words, your actions, your expressions. You build walls, masks, personas. And the deeper the need for approval, the higher the walls. Paradoxically, the more you seek connection through approval, the more isolated you become. The path to true freedom requires a radical shift in where you seek validation. It demands self-acceptance that is not conditional on others. It means building an inner fortress so strong that external opinions bounce off like arrows against stone. This doesn't mean you stop caring about others entirely. It means you care from a place of choice, not dependence. This freedom is frightening because it exposes you to rejection. When you no longer need approval, people may dislike you. They may criticize or abandon you. But that risk is the price of authenticity. Nietzsche believed that authenticity is more valuable than comfort. The approval of many is shallow, the judgment of few, honest. And only when you can bear honest judgment can you truly be free. Freedom from approval also unleashes creativity. When you stop designing yourself to please others, you begin to explore who you are beyond their expectations. You take risks. You speak truths. You follow desires that have been buried under layers of conditioning. This is the birthplace of greatness, of self-overcoming. So the journey to freedom is not external. It's internal. It's about severing the invisible chains of approval. It's about standing in your truth, naked and unashamed. Because only then are you free, not just in theory, but in the deepest, most lived sense of the word. Justice is often vengeance in disguise. This unsettling truth challenges our deepest assumptions about fairness and morality. We like to believe that justice is impartial, measured, and benevolent, an objective force balancing scales and correcting wrongs. But Nietzsche peeled back the layers of this ideal to reveal a darker reality. What we call justice is frequently driven by raw human emotion, particularly revenge cloaked in the language of righteousness. At its core, justice is about responding to harm. When someone wrongs us, justice demands a response, a correction, a punishment, a restoration. But the question Nietzsche asks is, who defines what is just, and why? In many cases, those who wield the power to enforce justice are not dispassionate arbiters, but individuals or groups seeking to settle scores, assert dominance, or preserve their own interests. Justice then becomes a tool for vengeance, masquerading as morality. Vengeance is personal, emotional, and often disproportionate. It arises from pain, humiliation, and a deep desire to reclaim lost honor or control. Justice, in theory, restrains vengeance by establishing rules, limits, and procedures. But when those rules are shaped by the same emotional impulses that fuel vengeance, justice loses its impartiality. It becomes a sanctioned form of retaliation with the trappings of legitimacy. This is why Nietzsche was wary of the moral systems that glorify punishment. Punishment, when justified as justice, often perpetuates cycles of pain rather than healing. The avenger and the victim swap roles endlessly. Instead of restoring balance, punishment can deepen divisions, breed resentment, and reinforce power structures. Justice, in these cases, does not serve truth or reconciliation. It serves the survival of certain values and hierarchies. Consider how easily righteous indignation can be manipulated. When a group feels wronged, it demands justice not only to correct the injury, but to assert its own narrative of victimhood and superiority. In that narrative, vengeance is repackaged as moral duty. Laws and courts become arenas for power struggles, where the winner defines justice, and the loser is condemned. The moral high ground becomes a battleground. Nietzsche's insight invites us to question our assumptions about justice. Is it truly about fairness, or is it about winning? Does it seek healing or domination? Can it transcend human passions, or is it inevitably entangled in them? Recognizing justice as vengeance in disguise does not mean rejecting justice altogether, but it demands a more honest, self-aware approach to it. True justice, if it exists, requires wisdom, restraint, and above all, humility. It requires acknowledging that our desire for retribution is deeply human, but also potentially blinding. It calls for systems that promote healing and transformation rather than perpetuating harm. It demands that we confront our own impulses for vengeance before we claim to serve justice. In a world where justice often wears the mask of vengeance, Nietzsche's challenge is radical: to seek beyond punishment, to cultivate forgiveness, understanding, and self-overcoming. To recognize that the cycle of harm can only be broken not by retaliation, but by the courage to rise above it. And in that ascent lies the possibility of justice that is truly just. A meaningful life requires the courage to offend. This may seem counterintuitive in a world that prizes politeness, consensus, and the avoidance of conflict. Yet Nietzsche understood that true significance, the kind that shakes foundations and creates lasting impact, demands more than passive acceptance. It demands the bravery to disrupt comfort zones, challenge deeply held beliefs, and stand firm even when you provoke discomfort or outrage. Offense is often seen as a negative act, something to be avoided in the name of harmony. But Nietzsche viewed offense differently. He saw it as a necessary catalyst for growth. To offend is to break the shell of complacency that protects superficiality and mediocrity. When your ideas, values, or actions offend, it means you're confronting something entrenched. You're refusing to play by the agreed-upon rules of silence or polite avoidance. And in that refusal lies authenticity. Why is this courage so rare? Because offending others risks rejection, isolation, and conflict. It challenges social bonds and threatens the fragile peace maintained by unspoken agreements. It requires a willingness to be misunderstood, to be labeled arrogant or cruel, simply because you refuse to dilute your truth. Most people choose comfort over confrontation, preferring approval over honesty. But Nietzsche argued that this choice leads to a life of quiet despair, not meaning. The courage to offend doesn't mean being reckless or intentionally hurtful. It means prioritizing truth and integrity over social acceptance. It means speaking what others fear to say, challenging hypocrisy and questioning dogma. It means accepting that not everyone will like you or even respect you, but recognizing that your value is not determined by their approval. Throughout history, those who changed the world often offended the status quo. Philosophers, artists, revolutionaries, they all disrupted the prevailing norms. Their courage to offend broke open new possibilities, expanded horizons, and forced societies to confront uncomfortable realities. Without offense, progress stalls. Without disruption, stagnation becomes the norm. Moreover, offending is not just external, it's internal as well. To live meaningfully, you must be willing to offend your own comfort zones, old habits, and limiting beliefs. You must challenge yourself even when it hurts. Growth demands confrontation with your own weaknesses, contradictions, and fears. That internal offense is the crucible of transformation. Nietzsche's call to offend is a call to embrace life's rawness. It's an invitation to be bold in your convictions, fearless in your expression, and resilient in your solitude. It's a reminder that to create meaning, you must sometimes shatter illusions, both in the world and within yourself. So the courage to offend is not just about rebellion. It's about authenticity. It's about choosing the difficult path of truth over the easy path of conformity. And it's through this courage that a life moves from the mundane to the profound. Most help is just a subtle form of domination. On the surface, helping seems like an act of kindness, generosity, and compassion. We applaud those who offer assistance, support, or guidance. But Nietzsche, with his piercing insight into human motives, would urge us to look deeper. Beneath many offers of help lies an implicit power dynamic, a way to control, influence, or bind others under the guise of benevolence. Help, when genuine, empowers. It uplifts the recipient, respects their autonomy, and strengthens their capacity to act independently. But too often, what passes for help does the opposite. It creates dependency, undermines confidence, and serves the helper's need for superiority or control. This is the subtle tyranny Nietzsche warned about, the disguised domination wrapped in the language of care. When someone helps by solving problems for others without their input, they assume authority over their lives. When advice is given unsolicited and expected to be followed, it becomes a demand, not support. When charity comes with strings attached or moral judgments, it enforces a hierarchy between giver and receiver. In these moments, help ceases to be a gift and becomes a chain. This dynamic thrives because many people want to feel needed. The helper gains identity and purpose through the act of assistance. But if that assistance prevents the other from growing or standing on their own, it's not true help. It's a form of control. The helper may believe they're acting out of kindness, but kindness without respect for autonomy can be cruel. Nietzsche challenges us to reconsider our attitudes toward help. He urges the cultivation of strength, both in ourselves and in those we assist. True help respects the will to power of the individual. It encourages self-overcoming, not passivity. It does not rescue by imposing solutions, but by inspiring action. It does not diminish others by making them dependent, but lifts them by awakening their potential. This perspective requires humility from the helper and courage from the helped. The helper must resist the temptation to dominate, to be the savior, or to satisfy their ego through assistance. The helped must resist the comfort of dependency and embrace the challenge of growth, even if that means struggling alone. Only then can help become transformative rather than controlling. In personal relationships, workplaces, and even social systems, this disguised domination masquerading as help is pervasive. It maintains inequalities under the guise of benevolence. It preserves power structures by keeping some weak and others indispensable. Nietzsche's insight calls for vigilance, an awareness that the road to domination is often paved with good intentions. Ultimately, most help is not neutral. It carries intent and consequence. And to give or receive help responsibly is to recognize that power is always in play. To break free from subtle domination, we must foster relationships rooted in respect, freedom, and genuine empowerment. Only then does help become a true act of human connection, not a mask for control. Good intentions often breed the greatest evils. This unsettling paradox runs through history like a silent current, shaping events and decisions with consequences far beyond what anyone anticipated. Nietzsche, with his skeptical eye on morality and human motivation, understood that the road to hell is frequently paved not with malice, but with earnestness. The desire to do good, when coupled with ignorance, arrogance, or rigidity, can unleash devastation masked as virtue. Why do good intentions lead to harm? Because intentions alone are not enough. Goodness requires wisdom, foresight, and humility. Without these, even the most sincere efforts can backfire catastrophically. History is full of examples. Reformers who, seeking justice, impose tyrannies, activists whose zeal destroys the very communities they claim to save, policies crafted to protect that end up enslaving. The problem lies in confusing intention with outcome, believing that because one means well, one's actions must be right. Nietzsche challenged the moral complacency that excuses harmful acts simply because they are well-intentioned. He saw how moral dogma can blind people to the real effects of their actions. When intentions become sacred, they shield perpetrators from accountability. "I only wanted to help" becomes a defense against criticism, but good intentions do not negate harm. The innocent aim does not cleanse destructive consequences. This dynamic is fueled by a kind of moral hubris, the belief that one's vision of good is universal and infallible. When people hold their intentions above scrutiny, they close themselves off to dissenting voices, alternative perspectives, or unintended results. They become rigid, dogmatic, and intolerant. The desire to enforce a better world can turn into a crusade that crushes freedom, diversity, and complexity. Good intentions also ignore the complexity of life. Human systems are interwoven with countless variables, unpredictable reactions, and hidden consequences. What seems like a straightforward improvement can ripple outward in unexpected ways. Well-meaning laws can create oppression. Charitable acts can foster dependency. Policies designed to protect can suffocate innovation. Nietzsche would argue that true morality requires confronting these complexities, embracing uncertainty, and accepting responsibility not just for intentions, but for outcomes. It demands courage to question one's own motives, humility to admit mistakes, and wisdom to learn from failure. Good intentions are the beginning, not the end, of ethical action. This awareness also challenges us to rethink how we judge others. It is easy to condemn those who cause harm. it is harder to understand how good intentions might have led them astray. Nietzsche calls for deeper reflection rather than quick judgment, to recognize that evil is not always born from wickedness, but sometimes from the blindness of virtue. In the end, the lesson is clear. Good intentions are fragile shields that can mask deep dangers. They require vigilance, critical thinking, and above all, an unrelenting commitment to truth over comfort. Because a meaningful life and a just society cannot be built on intention alone. They must be built on clarity, accountability, and the courage to face uncomfortable realities. People will crucify truth-tellers and worship their executioners. This is one of the most tragic patterns of human history and psychology, a pattern Nietzsche exposed with ruthless clarity. Truth, especially uncomfortable truth, is rarely welcomed with open arms. Instead, it often threatens the status quo, unsettles comfort, and exposes hypocrisy. And because most people prefer comfort over confrontation, they turn on the messenger rather than the message. The truth-teller is a disruptive force. They do not offer soothing platitudes or convenient lies. They reveal what others want to hide, from personal failings to societal corruption. This revelation can be painful, even dangerous, because it forces people to question their beliefs, values, and identities. And when people feel threatened, their instinct is often to protect themselves, not by seeking truth, but by eliminating the threat. Thus, truth-tellers become scapegoats. They are demonized, silenced, and punished. The very people who benefit from their courage turn on them. History is filled with such examples: prophets, philosophers, reformers, whistleblowers, each subjected to exile, imprisonment, or worse. Their message is erased, but their pain lingers as a warning to others. Meanwhile, those who enforce the suppression, the executioners, are often celebrated. They are seen as heroes of order, protectors of peace, or defenders of tradition. They provide the illusion of stability and safety. People crave this. They want chaos tamed, discomfort avoided. So they elevate those who maintain the comforting lie, even if it means trampling on truth. Nietzsche recognized that this dynamic is rooted in fear of change, fear of uncertainty, fear of loss. The executioners embody this fear. They wield power not because they are righteous, but because they exploit the collective anxiety. The crowd rallies behind them because the alternative, facing harsh truths, is too daunting. But the cost of this dynamic is profound. By crucifying truth-tellers and worshiping executioners, societies sacrifice growth, justice, and authenticity. They imprison themselves in cycles of ignorance and oppression. Truth becomes a dangerous taboo rather than a guiding light. The potential for transformation is lost. Yet Nietzsche also saw the paradoxical power of the truth-teller. Despite persecution, their ideas often survive and eventually reshape the world. The crucifixion is temporary. The truth endures. The executioners may rule the moment, but they cannot kill the seed of awareness planted by courage. This philosophy challenges us personally and collectively. Are we willing to listen to uncomfortable truths, even when they offend? Can we resist the urge to vilify those who challenge us? And can we recognize the seductive power of executioners who promise order at the expense of freedom? Ultimately, this dynamic invites us to cultivate courage, the courage to seek truth, to speak it, and to protect it. Because a society that crucifies truth-tellers and worships their executioners is doomed to remain in darkness. Only by reversing this pattern can humanity move toward genuine wisdom and liberation. Hope is a beautiful form of delusion. It is one of humanity's most cherished illusions, a comforting light in the darkness, a promise of better days ahead. Nietzsche recognized hope as both a vital force and a potentially dangerous deception. It sustains us through hardship, fuels our dreams, and propels us forward. But at the same time, hope can blind us to reality, trap us in cycles of waiting, and prevent us from confronting the true nature of existence. Hope, in its purest form, offers psychological relief. When faced with suffering, uncertainty, or despair, hope whispers that things will improve, that pain will pass, that success or happiness is just around the corner. This whisper is soothing. It provides meaning in chaos and purpose amid randomness. Without hope, many would crumble under the weight of existence. Nietzsche acknowledged this necessity. Hope is a balm for the soul. Yet, Nietzsche also warned against hope's delusive side. When hope becomes an expectation detached from action, it is no longer a motivator. It is a trap. It keeps people suspended in passivity, endlessly waiting for change that may never come. Hope becomes a substitute for courage and responsibility. Instead of confronting hardship head-on or accepting the limits of reality, individuals retreat into fantasies of rescue or salvation. This is why Nietzsche described hope as a double-edged sword. On one side, it's a source of strength. On the other, it's a veil that can obscure truth. The greatest danger is not that hope fails, but that it blinds people to failure, making them cling to illusions instead of adapting or overcoming. In this way, hope can prolong suffering by fostering denial rather than acceptance. Moreover, hope is often manipulated by others, leaders, ideologues, religious figures, who offer hopeful promises to gain control. They exploit the human craving for meaning and security, channeling hope into obedience or submission. This turns hope into a tool of domination rather than liberation. Nietzsche's skepticism reminds us to question hopeful narratives and examine whose interests they serve. To transcend hope's delusions, Nietzsche encourages embracing a more radical form of acceptance, confronting life's chaos without illusions. This doesn't mean despair. It means strength to face reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. It means creating meaning through action, not waiting for meaning to arrive. It means cultivating resilience, courage, and self-overcoming instead of relying on external salvation. In this light, hope transforms from passive expectation into active engagement. It becomes less about longing for a better future and more about making that future through will and effort. The beautiful delusion dissolves into a sober yet passionate embrace of existence, with all its uncertainties and challenges. Thus, hope remains essential, but it must be held lightly, as a tool, not a crutch. Recognizing its power and its pitfalls allows us to harness hope without being enslaved by it. Nietzsche's philosophy invites us to awaken from the comforting dream of hope and step into the raw, vibrant reality where true freedom and creativity reside. Faith is fear dressed in devotion. This is a piercing insight that cuts beneath the comforting surface of religious belief and spiritual certainty. Nietzsche recognized that faith is often not a pure expression of trust or enlightenment, but a psychological shield, an armor forged from the anxiety of uncertainty and the terror of the unknown. Beneath the rituals, prayers, and dogmas lies a deep human fear of chaos, death, meaninglessness, and isolation. Faith, in many forms, arises because the human mind cannot tolerate the abyss of uncertainty. Faced with the vast, indifferent universe, people seek refuge in structures that promise order, purpose, and transcendence. Belief systems offer narratives that make life intelligible and death less frightening. This comfort, however, comes at a price. Faith demands surrender. It asks for trust without evidence, obedience without questioning. And this surrender is motivated less by confident certainty and more by the primal fear of chaos breaking through the facade. Nietzsche saw this fear not as a flaw to be condemned, but as a natural human condition. Yet he was critical of how faith often disguises that fear as devotion, turning anxiety into virtue. The more uncertain people feel, the more fervently they cling to belief, not necessarily because it is true, but because it is comforting. This is why faith communities can be so insular and resistant to doubt. Doubt threatens the very foundation of their security. It exposes the fear behind the devotion. Moreover, faith as fear can manifest in rigid dogmatism. When belief is born from fear, it is guarded jealously. Questions are suppressed. Dissenters are labeled heretics or enemies. This rigidity is a defensive mechanism. It protects the fearful from having to confront the fragility of their own faith. The louder the devotion, often the deeper the fear. This dynamic also explains the paradoxical behavior of some believers. They preach love and compassion, but may respond to criticism with hostility. They seek salvation, but often exclude or condemn others. Their faith is not just a spiritual path, but a fortress against the terrifying openness of existence. Nietzsche challenges us to see beyond this paradox and understand faith's psychological roots. Yet Nietzsche does not dismiss spirituality outright. He values the human striving for meaning and transcendence, but he insists that true courage requires facing fear honestly, not masking it with an unquestioning faith. Authentic spirituality arises not from fear, but from strength. Strength to embrace uncertainty, to create one's own values, and to live without illusions. To awaken from faith as fear is to step into existential freedom. It means relinquishing the need for absolute certainty and embracing life's mysteries with openness. It requires humility and resilience, the ability to hold paradox and doubt without despair. In this way, faith can transform from fear disguised into devotion into a genuine affirmation of life's complexity. Nietzsche's insight invites us to examine our beliefs with courage and honesty. Are we driven by love and truth, or by fear wrapped in devotion? Recognizing this allows us to move beyond mere faith into deeper understanding, and ultimately into true freedom. The truth is hated most by those who pretend to love it. This paradox exposes a common hypocrisy embedded deep in human nature and society. Many people claim to cherish truth. They celebrate honesty, demand transparency, and identify as seekers of knowledge. Yet, when confronted with truths that challenge their beliefs, identities, or comforts, they resist fiercely. Nietzsche understood this contradiction as a fundamental tension. The truth that truly liberates is also the truth that wounds, and those who pretend to love truth often do so only insofar as it confirms their pre-existing views. Pretending to love truth often means loving a sanitized, convenient version of it. People want truth that flatters them, validates their worldview, or supports their interests. They endorse facts until those facts threaten their ego, values, or social standing. Then, suddenly, the same people who proclaim their devotion to truth turn defensive, dismissive, or even hostile. They accuse truth-tellers of disloyalty or accuse inconvenient truths of being lies. Nietzsche saw this as a defense mechanism, a refusal to engage with the uncomfortable reality beneath surface affirmations. This hypocrisy is not just intellectual, but deeply emotional. Truth forces confrontation with reality, and reality can be brutal. It demands self-examination, acknowledgement of error, and often the painful dismantling of cherished illusions. For many, this process threatens identity and security. So rather than embracing discomfort, they retreat into denial or selective acceptance. They cultivate a form of cognitive dissonance masked as devotion to truth, but it is really fear of change. Moreover, Nietzsche highlighted how those who pretend to love truth can become the fiercest enemies of real truth. Because truth disrupts the status quo, threatens power, and demands transformation, it inevitably provokes resistance. The very people who proclaim themselves defenders of truth often wield it as a weapon, cherry-picking facts to reinforce dogma or attacking dissenters under the guise of protecting truth. This performative allegiance to truth maintains control and suppresses genuine inquiry. The problem deepens when social, political, or religious identities become entangled with supposed truths. Questioning or rejecting these truths is then seen as betrayal, heresy, or moral failure. This creates an environment where truth is less about discovery and more about allegiance. Nietzsche warned that this dynamic stifles progress and breeds intellectual stagnation because it replaces open exploration with ideological warfare. True love of truth, Nietzsche insists, requires courage. The courage to face uncomfortable realities, to question oneself, and to endure isolation or rejection. It means valuing truth over comfort, over popularity, and over identity preservation. This kind of commitment is rare because it demands strength that most are unwilling or unprepared to muster. Recognizing this hypocrisy invites profound self-reflection. Are we truly seekers of truth, or are we attached to truths that serve us? Do we welcome challenges to our beliefs, or do we only tolerate affirmations? Do we defend truth itself, or our version of it? Only by confronting these questions honestly can we move beyond the superficial love of truth to genuine engagement. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to embrace the full complexity of truth, the light and the shadow, the comfort and the pain. Because the path to wisdom is not paved with easy answers, but with the courage to face what is, even when it is hated by those who claim to love it. Being misunderstood is the price of being real. This truth runs counter to the deep human desire for acceptance, clarity, and belonging. We want to be seen, heard, and understood on our own terms, but the reality is far more complex. Nietzsche grasped this paradox with sharp insight. Authenticity, the courage to live and speak one's truth, is often met not with applause, but with confusion, rejection, or hostility. To be real means to stand firmly in your own experience, values, and perspective, even when they clash with popular opinion or societal norms. It means refusing to conform for the sake of comfort or approval. This kind of honesty is disruptive because it challenges others to rethink their assumptions. It demands vulnerability and exposes fractures in the collective illusion of consensus. Most people are uncomfortable with difference, especially when it confronts their own beliefs or self-image. When someone speaks authentically, it can feel like an accusation or threat, an unwelcome mirror reflecting what others deny about themselves. Instead of curiosity or openness, the authentic individual is often met with skepticism or dismissal. Misunderstanding becomes a shield used to avoid engagement with uncomfortable truths. Nietzsche understood that being misunderstood is not a failure, but an inevitable consequence of depth and originality. The mass tends to gravitate toward simplicity, repetition, and familiarity. Complexity, nuance, and contradiction, hallmarks of real experience, are often lost or distorted in translation. The real person's words and actions may be twisted into caricatures or reduced to sound bites that fit preconceived narratives. This price is not just social, but existential. To be misunderstood is to experience isolation, a feeling that your inner reality is inaccessible to those around you. It can be painful, even lonely. But Nietzsche argued that this solitude is essential for growth. True selfhood cannot flourish in the echo chamber of approval. It requires space to wrestle with contradictions, to evolve, and to cultivate inner strength. Moreover, being misunderstood tests the authenticity of one's convictions. It demands resilience, the capacity to hold on to your truth when the world doubts or rejects it. It also requires humility, the recognition that no one can fully know another's inner life, and that misunderstanding is partly inevitable. For Nietzsche, The misunderstood were often the great creators, philosophers, and revolutionaries, those who changed the course of history precisely because they dared to be different. Their legacy is a testament to the power of authenticity over conformity. They show that the price of being real is not just social alienation, but also the potential for profound impact. This philosophy invites us to reconsider how we value understanding and acceptance. Rather than fearing misunderstanding, we can see it as a sign of depth and integrity. It encourages us to embrace our uniqueness, to speak our truth boldly, and to accept solitude as a companion on the path to self-realization. Ultimately, being misunderstood is not a punishment, but a rite of passage. It is the crucible through which authenticity is tested and refined. Nietzsche's insight challenges us to hold fast to our reality, knowing that misunderstanding is the price we pay, and the proof we live genuinely. The greatest liars are the ones who lie to themselves. This is a profound and unsettling truth that Nietzsche laid bare, a truth that reveals how self-deception is often the most insidious form of falsehood. While we may easily spot lies told to others, the lies we tell ourselves are far more difficult to recognize and even harder to confront. They shape our identities, justify our actions, and shield us from painful realities, but they also imprison us in illusions that stunt growth and corrupt authenticity. Self-deception operates because it serves a psychological need, protection. The human mind seeks coherence, comfort, and meaning, and it will often twist facts, memories, and interpretations to maintain a sense of safety. We deny our flaws, minimize our failures, and reframe our mistakes to preserve a positive self-image. This internal lying is not always conscious. Many lies to ourselves are subtle, embedded in habits of thought and feeling that feel natural and automatic. Nietzsche understood that self-deception is dangerous precisely because it masquerades as truth. It feels real because it is woven into our deepest beliefs. Unlike external lies, which can be challenged by evidence or contradiction, internal lies are defended fiercely by the subconscious. They become part of the narrative we live by, the story we tell ourselves about who we are and why we do what we do. This kind of lying undermines authentic living. When we deceive ourselves, we lose contact with reality, and with it, the opportunity for true self-overcoming. We mistake comfort for clarity, complacency for contentment. We avoid confronting painful truths about our desires, our motives, our limitations, because doing so threatens the fragile structure of self we have built. But in avoiding these truths, we become trapped in cycles of repetition, unable to evolve. Nietzsche challenged individuals to confront their own lies with brutal honesty. He believed that true strength comes from piercing the veil of self-deception and facing oneself without flinching. This process is agonizing because it dismantles the illusions we depend on. It exposes the contradictions, weaknesses, and hidden drives that shape our behavior. But only through this painful clarity can genuine transformation occur. Moreover, self-deception is often the root of many interpersonal conflicts. When we lie to ourselves about our intentions or feelings, we miscommunicate and misunderstand others. We project our illusions onto relationships, creating false expectations and disappointments. The lies we tell ourselves ripple outward, infecting our interactions and eroding trust. Nietzsche's insight also serves as a warning against moral complacency. It is easy to judge others for dishonesty or hypocrisy, but far more challenging to scrutinize one's own truths. Self-lies can be subtle forms of arrogance, convincing ourselves that we are better, kinder, or wiser than we truly are. Recognizing and dismantling these illusions requires humility and courage. In the end, the greatest liars are those who lie to themselves because they betray their own potential. They sacrifice freedom for illusion, growth for comfort, and truth for ease. Nietzsche's philosophy calls us to awaken from this deception, to embrace the discomfort of self-awareness and the liberating power of truth. Only then can we begin the journey toward becoming who we really are. To evolve is to disappoint the past version of yourself. This may sound harsh, but it captures a fundamental truth about growth and transformation that Nietzsche understood deeply. Evolution, whether personal, intellectual, or spiritual, is not a gentle process of continuity, but a sometimes painful process of rupture. It demands that we break away from old identities, beliefs, and comforts, often leaving behind parts of ourselves that once felt essential. The self you were yesterday becomes an obstacle to the self you are becoming tomorrow. We all carry with us a narrative of who we are or who we think we should be. This narrative is shaped by past experiences, social conditioning, fears, and desires. It provides a sense of stability and coherence, anchoring us in familiar ways of thinking and acting. But evolution requires that this narrative be questioned, deconstructed, and rewritten. The past self, with its limited understanding and patterns, will resist this change because it fears loss of identity, security, and control. Nietzsche saw this tension as a vital part of the human condition. To grow is to challenge the comfortable illusions of the past self. It means recognizing that the beliefs, values, and habits that once served you may now be holding you back. This recognition can feel like betrayal, not just of your old self, but of your own hopes and dreams. The part of you that clings to the familiar will feel disappointed, even wounded by the changes you make. This disappointment is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of progress. It means you are pushing beyond old limits, refusing to be confined by yesterday's version of yourself. The discomfort of disappointing your past self is the discomfort of becoming. It's the resistance you meet when you break free from patterns of thought and behavior that no longer serve your growth. Moreover, this process involves grief. You mourn the loss of the old you, the person you thought you were, the comforts you relied on, the illusions you cherished. Nietzsche's philosophy acknowledges that transformation is not just about gaining new strengths, but also about losing attachments. This loss can be painful, but it is necessary for renewal. To evolve also means to accept that others may not recognize or understand your transformation. The past self often exists in the memories of friends, family, and even in your own mind. When you change, you may disappoint not only yourself, but also those who expected you to remain the same. This external disappointment can create conflict, isolation, or doubt. But Nietzsche encourages embracing this solitude as a crucible for authentic becoming. Ultimately, to evolve is an act of courage, a willingness to disappoint the past self and all that it represents. It requires honesty, resilience, and a vision of who you want to become that is stronger than your attachment to who you were. Nietzsche's call is to embrace this painful process as the necessary path toward greater freedom, creativity, and self-mastery. In this light, disappointment becomes a signpost rather than a setback. It signals that you are shedding old skins, breaking chains, and stepping into new possibilities. To evolve is to disappoint, but it is also to become truly alive. Your chains feel like home when you've worn them long enough. This is a profound and sobering insight into human psychology and the nature of freedom that Nietzsche would recognize immediately. Chains, whether literal or metaphorical, represent limitations, restrictions, or constraints placed upon us by society, relationships, beliefs, or even our own fears. Yet over time, these very chains become familiar, comforting, and inseparable from our identity. They transform from symbols of bondage into the walls of our psychological home. At first, chains are felt as painful constraints. They bind us, restrict movement, and remind us of what we lack. They provoke resistance, discomfort, and the desire for liberation. But human beings are remarkably adaptive creatures. Faced with constant constraint, the mind and spirit begin to accommodate. The discomfort dulls, the pain becomes background noise, and what once was intolerable gradually feels normal. This normalization of bondage is the heart of Nietzsche's observation. When chains are worn long enough, they no longer seem like chains. They become part of the self. The rules that once limited us become internalized laws. The fears that once held us captive become familiar companions. The roles and expectations that once felt suffocating become the framework through which we understand ourselves and the world. This psychological shift explains why many people resist change even when they are unhappy. Freedom is terrifying because it requires facing the unknown. To break chains is to leave home, the familiar patterns, identities, and securities that have defined us. It means stepping into uncertainty and potential chaos. Nietzsche recognized that the fear of losing this home is often stronger than the desire for freedom. Moreover, these chains often masquerade as virtues or necessities. People justify their limitations with reasons. This is just how things are. I have responsibilities. I don't want to upset others. Such justifications deepen the sense of belonging to the cage. The chains feel not just comfortable, but right. They become the lens through which we see ourselves as good, moral, or responsible. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges this complacency. He calls for radical self-examination to recognize which chains we have internalized and to question whether they truly serve our growth or only maintain our captivity. This requires courage, the courage to disrupt the familiar, to risk discomfort, and to face the void beyond the known. Breaking free from chains is not just about physical liberation. It's about psychological and spiritual emancipation. It demands shedding identities and beliefs that no longer fit. It means creating a new home, a self-defined space built on authenticity, strength, and self-overcoming. But this process is painful because it involves grieving the loss of the old comfort, the old certainty. In understanding that our chains feel like home because of familiarity, Nietzsche invites us to awaken from the illusion of safety. To realize that true home is not the cage we have grown used to, but the expansive freedom that comes with self-mastery. And only by embracing this discomfort can we become truly alive, no longer prisoners, but creators of our own destiny. No one wants you to grow past the version they can control. This is a harsh truth about human relationships and social dynamics that Nietzsche keenly understood. Growth, real transformative growth, is threatening to those around us because it challenges existing power structures, expectations, and the comfort of predictability. People often prefer you to remain within the boundaries of their influence, where they know your limits and can predict your behavior. When you evolve beyond those limits, you disrupt the balance, and that disruption can provoke resistance or rejection. From childhood, we are conditioned to fit into roles defined by family, culture, and society. Parents, teachers, friends, they create a framework of who they expect us to be. This framework provides security and belonging, but it also subtly enforces control. To them, your growth is welcome only so far as it aligns with their values and preserves their influence. If you start questioning their beliefs, challenging their authority, or stepping outside their comfort zone, you become unpredictable and therefore threatening. Nietzsche saw that this dynamic operates in all social relationships. Lovers want a partner who fits their image. Bosses want employees who follow their directives. Friends want companions who affirm their views. Growth that leads to independence, self-definition, or radical change is often met with fear, envy, or hostility. Those who once supported your development may try to pull you back, diminish your confidence, or label your evolution as betrayal or selfishness. This resistance stems from insecurity. When others control you, they feel powerful. Your growth undermines their power because it reduces your dependence on them. It exposes their limitations and forces them to confront their own stagnation. For many, losing control over someone they care about feels like loss or failure. So instead of celebrating your transformation, they resist it. Nietzsche's philosophy encourages us to recognize this pattern and to choose growth despite it. True self-overcoming requires breaking free not just from external chains, but also from the subtle bonds of others' expectations. It demands the courage to disappoint those who want you small enough to control. This disappointment is painful because it often means losing approval, affection, or security. But it is necessary for authenticity. Furthermore, growth beyond control is not just an act of rebellion, it is an act of creation. It means defining your own values, forging your own path, and claiming ownership of your life. It means becoming the architect of your identity rather than the reflection of others' desires. Understanding that no one wants you to grow past the version they can control also fosters compassion. It helps us see why people resist change, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. It invites patience with others while maintaining resolve in our own evolution. Ultimately, Nietzsche's insight calls us to prioritize our becoming over acceptance, to embrace the loneliness that may come with stepping beyond control, to find strength in disappointment, knowing it signals true transformation, and to live boldly as the fullest version of ourselves, free from the chains of others' expectations. The crowd doesn't want leaders. They want caretakers. This insight strikes at the core of societal dynamics and human psychology. Nietzsche understood that masses crave safety, predictability, and reassurance more than visionary direction or bold transformation. The crowd fears chaos and uncertainty, so it prefers figures who soothe, maintain order, and preserve comfort rather than those who challenge, provoke, or disrupt. Caretakers provide stability. They listen, mediate, and administer. They enforce rules gently, manage conflicts with diplomacy, and protect the status quo. To the crowd, this is valuable because it minimizes risk. The caretaker's role is to reduce anxiety, to prevent upheaval, and to keep life manageable. They do not demand radical change or personal sacrifice. They promise continuity and safety. Leaders in the Nietzschean sense are different. They are not caretakers. They are creators, warriors, and sometimes disruptors. They do not seek approval or comfort. Instead, they pursue vision, truth, and power. They demand courage from themselves and others. They challenge complacency and push boundaries. Leaders invite risk and uncertainty because they know growth requires it. This is inherently uncomfortable for the crowd. The crowd's preference for caretakers over leaders explains why societies often resist progress. Change threatens comfort. It unsettles habits and beliefs, so the crowd elevates those who reassure rather than those who innovate. Caretakers are praised for their empathy, patience, and service, but these qualities can become tools for maintaining control rather than enabling transformation. Nietzsche saw that true leadership requires going beyond the crowd's desires. A real leader cannot simply placate or serve the masses. They must lead, which often means standing apart. Leadership demands solitude, conviction, and the willingness to offend or disappoint. It requires an inner strength that does not depend on popular approval. This dynamic also explains political and social patterns. Populist figures often present themselves as caretakers, protectors of the people's comfort and values, rather than radical leaders. They promise to shield the crowd from change, complexity, and challenge. While this may garner short-term support, it rarely produces genuine progress or greatness. Understanding that the crowd wants caretakers rather than leaders is a call to courage. It invites individuals to embrace leadership despite resistance or loneliness. It challenges us to move beyond seeking validation from the masses and instead commit to the difficult work of creation, transformation, and self-overcoming. Ultimately, Nietzsche's philosophy encourages a re-evaluation of what it means to lead. Leadership is not about popularity or service in the conventional sense. It is about forging new paths, holding vision, and inspiring others to rise, even when the crowd prefers comfort over challenge. True leaders accept that their role is often misunderstood and that the crowd's desire for caretakers is a barrier to evolution, not its fulfillment. This perspective invites reflection on how we engage with authority and change. It asks whether we are content with caretakers who maintain the familiar or willing to follow leaders who ignite the unknown. And in this choice lies the future, not just of societies, but of each individual's potential to grow beyond the crowd's expectations. Many don't want freedom. They want safety and a leash. This is a stark truth that Nietzsche recognized about human nature and society. While freedom is often idealized as the ultimate goal, the pinnacle of personal and collective aspiration, in reality, many people prefer the security of constraints over the uncertainty of liberty. They crave the predictability that comes with rules, boundaries, and guidance, even if those things limit their autonomy. Freedom is terrifying. It demands responsibility, choice, and confrontation with the unknown. It strips away comforting illusions and forces individuals to create their own values, make their own decisions, and face the consequences alone. For many, this is too daunting. The vast expanse of freedom can feel like an abyss rather than an opportunity. It exposes vulnerability and the possibility of failure. As a result, many willingly exchange freedom for safety, a leash to hold them back from the chaos of self-determination. This leash can take many forms: societal norms, religious doctrines, political ideologies, or even personal routines and habits. These structures offer guidance and a sense of belonging, but they also impose limits. They tell people what to think, how to behave, and what to believe. In return, they offer comfort, order, and the illusion of security. Nietzsche saw this desire for safety and leash as a form of weakness masquerading as virtue. The herd clings to these bonds not because they are true freedom, but because they are easier. The herd prefers obedience, conformity, and the denial of individuality. This creates a paradox. While people may talk about freedom, their actions often reveal a preference for constraint. This is why true freedom is rare, and why those who pursue it often face resistance or isolation. To be free means to break away from the leash, to question, to rebel, to endure uncertainty. It means to accept the burden of responsibility without relying on external rules or approval. This kind of freedom requires strength, courage, and a willingness to face existential solitude. Moreover, the safety people seek through the leash can be illusory. It may protect them from immediate danger or discomfort, but it also prevents growth, creativity, and authentic self-expression. Nietzsche's philosophy encourages individuals to recognize this trade-off and to choose freedom consciously, knowing it involves risk and sacrifice. Understanding that many prefer safety and leash also invites compassion. It explains why so many resist change or new ideas, not out of ignorance, but out of fear. It shows that freedom is not just an external condition, but an internal state that requires overcoming deep psychological barriers. In the end, Nietzsche's insight challenges us to reflect on our own relationship with freedom. Are we truly free, or are we holding on to invisible leashes for comfort? Are we willing to embrace the discomfort of autonomy, or do we settle for the safety of conformity? The answer shapes not only our lives, but the future of human potential. The noble suffer more, not less. This is a profound and counterintuitive insight that Nietzsche articulated with clarity and depth. In a culture that often equates suffering with weakness or failure, Nietzsche turns the tables, asserting that true nobility is not a shield against suffering, but a magnet for it. The noble, those who strive for greatness, authenticity, and self-overcoming, do not escape pain. They embrace it, endure it, and are refined by it. Suffering is often seen as a punishment or a burden to avoid. People seek comfort, ease, and security as antidotes to pain, but Nietzsche understood that suffering is an inherent part of the path toward higher existence. To be noble is to take on responsibilities and challenges that ordinary lives avoid. Nobility demands confronting harsh truths, making difficult choices, and resisting the easy seductions of conformity and complacency. This inevitably leads to greater suffering, not less. The noble suffer more because they push beyond limits. They do not settle for superficial pleasures or simple answers. They wrestle with themselves and the world, exposing their vulnerabilities and contradictions. This internal struggle is painful but essential for growth. The noble understand that without suffering, there can be no transformation, no forging of character. Like a blacksmith's fire, suffering tempers and strengthens. Moreover, the noble often find themselves isolated. Their values, visions, and actions set them apart from the crowd. This alienation brings loneliness and misunderstanding. While others seek approval and easy acceptance, the noble accept rejection and solitude as the price of their integrity. This social suffering is a testament to their commitment to truth and authenticity. Nietzsche also pointed out that the noble bear the weight of greater expectations. Their actions influence others. Their failures have wider consequences. This burden adds to their suffering because they cannot act lightly or selfishly. They carry the pain of responsibility alongside their personal trials. Importantly, the noble do not seek suffering for its own sake. They do not romanticize pain or martyrdom. Instead, they recognize suffering as an unavoidable aspect of pursuing a meaningful and powerful life. They choose this path precisely because it leads to self-overcoming and the creation of value. This philosophy challenges modern ideals that prioritize comfort and happiness above all. It invites us to reconsider the role of suffering in our lives, not as something to be eliminated, but as a necessary force for growth. The noble do not escape suffering. They transcend it. Understanding that the noble suffer more encourages resilience and courage. It helps us accept our own difficulties as part of a larger process. It inspires us to seek depth and strength rather than ease. In the end, Nietzsche's insight reveals that suffering is not the enemy of greatness. It is its companion. The noble suffer more because they live more fully, more truthfully, and more courageously. Their suffering is the price of their ascent and the source of their strength. Those who can't create will destroy what threatens them. This is a sharp and unsettling observation by Nietzsche about human nature and society's dynamics. Creation requires courage, vision, and strength. It demands the ability to bring something new into existence, to innovate, to risk failure for the sake of growth. But not everyone possesses or chooses this path. When faced with forces or ideas that challenge their status, identity, or security, those who lack creative power often respond not with construction, but with destruction. Creation is inherently difficult and uncertain. It requires stepping into the unknown, embracing vulnerability, and enduring setbacks. To create is to assert one's will in a way that transforms reality, and this transformation is unsettling to many. The creative process disrupts old patterns, breaks comfortable illusions, and invites chaos before order emerges. Not everyone is willing or able to endure this process. Those who cannot create, whether because of fear, incapacity, or choice, often feel threatened by creation itself. New ideas, new ways of living, and new values challenge the familiar structures that have defined them. Rather than engage with these challenges constructively, they seek to destroy them. Destruction is a defensive act, a way to eliminate uncertainty by erasing the source of threat. It is simpler, safer, and less demanding than creation. Nietzsche's insight reveals how destruction is often a symptom of creative impotence. When people cannot build something better, they aim to tear down what they cannot accept. This dynamic plays out in politics, culture, and personal relationships. Movements that seek radical change are met with backlash, censorship, or violence by those who fear losing control. Innovators and visionaries are often vilified by those who feel their foundations are shaking. This destructive impulse is not always conscious. Sometimes it manifests as resistance to change, skepticism, or denial. But underlying these responses is a deeper fear, the fear of irrelevance, of loss, of the unknown. Destruction offers a temporary reprieve, but at the cost of stagnation and decay. In contrast, creation is life-affirming. It opens possibilities, generates meaning, and fosters growth. It requires the courage to face uncertainty and the humility to learn and adapt. Nietzsche celebrated the creator as the highest expression of the will to power, the individual who shapes their own destiny and the world around them. Recognizing this dynamic invites reflection on how we respond to threats and challenges. Do we choose to build and innovate, or do we seek to dismantle and negate? Understanding that destruction often signals a lack of creation can inspire empathy for those who resist change, while also challenging us to embody creativity ourselves. Ultimately, Nietzsche's philosophy calls for embracing creation over destruction, not because creation is easy, but because it is the path to growth, freedom, and vitality. Those who create forge the future. Those who destroy cling to the past. And it is through creation that humanity moves forward, transcending fear and limitation. Your innocence is their opportunity. This phrase captures a subtle yet powerful dynamic that Nietzsche recognized in human interactions and social structures. Innocence, understood here not just as naivety or purity, but as unguarded trust, openness, and vulnerability, is often exploited by those who seek advantage, control, or power. While innocence can be a source of genuine goodness and openness to experience, it also leaves one exposed to manipulation by those who see opportunity in that openness. Innocence invites trust and goodwill. It assumes others will act with fairness, honesty, and respect. This assumption allows relationships and societies to function smoothly when everyone acts with integrity. But Nietzsche was keenly aware that not everyone shares this honesty. Some individuals and groups recognize innocence as a vulnerability to be exploited. They use the unsuspecting trust of the innocent to impose their will, extract resources, or advance agendas without consent. This exploitation can take many forms. It might be subtle, such as emotional manipulation in personal relationships, where the innocent are drawn into unhealthy dynamics because they believe in the good intentions of others. Or it can be systemic, where institutions prey on the trusting nature of citizens, demanding obedience or conformity under the guise of protection or morality. In all these cases, innocence becomes a door left open for intrusion. Nietzsche's insight warns against blind trust. He encourages cultivating awareness, discernment, and self-possession. Innocence without wisdom leaves one defenseless. To live authentically, one must balance openness with vigilance, remaining receptive to life's possibilities, but guarded against those who would use that openness as leverage. At the same time, Nietzsche does not dismiss innocence as inherently bad. Innocence reflects a capacity for wonder empathy, and connection, but it must be tempered by strength. The innocent must become warriors of the soul, able to protect their vulnerability while still engaging with the world fully. Recognizing that your innocence is their opportunity also invites reflection on power dynamics. It asks, who benefits when you trust without question? Who gains when you withhold skepticism? Understanding these questions is crucial for reclaiming agency. Ultimately, Nietzsche's philosophy calls for a transformation, not the loss of innocence, but the evolution of it. Innocence that is aware, resilient, and self-aware becomes a source of true power. It no longer invites exploitation, but inspires respect. It remains open, yet unbreakable. This balance is difficult, but essential. It allows one to live deeply without surrendering to cynicism. It enables connection without submission. Your innocence can be an opportunity, not for others to exploit, but for you to engage with life's fullest potential, grounded in both trust and wisdom. Most people live small lives because the mirror terrifies them. This mirror isn't a physical reflection, but a metaphor for self-awareness, the honest confrontation with who we truly are beneath the masks, illusions, and justifications. Nietzsche understood that genuine self-examination is one of the most daunting challenges a person can face. The truth about ourselves can be uncomfortable, exposing our weaknesses, fears, and failures. For many, this fear leads to shrinking their lives rather than expanding them. Living small means playing it safe, avoiding risks, suppressing desires, conforming to expectations, and sticking to what is familiar and controllable. It's a way to dodge the anxiety and vulnerability that come with growth. When the mirror reflects uncomfortable truths, unfulfilled potential, past mistakes, hidden resentment, many choose to look away rather than engage. They settle for mediocrity rather than pursue greatness, comfort rather than challenge. Nietzsche believed that this avoidance is the root of much human suffering. The terror of facing oneself leads to denial, distraction, and superficiality. People construct elaborate stories to justify their choices and ignore the deeper call to become more. This fear keeps them trapped in cycles of repetition, never fully alive, never fully free. The mirror forces honesty. It demands that we acknowledge our fears, our flaws, and our unrealized dreams. It reveals the distance between who we are and who we could be. And that revelation is terrifying because it calls us to responsibility, the responsibility to change, to strive, to risk failure. But this confrontation is also the path to liberation. Nietzsche saw the act of looking into the mirror and accepting the reflection as the beginning of self-overcoming. To live fully, one must embrace the discomfort of self-knowledge. This courage breaks the chains of smallness and opens the door to creativity, authenticity, and power. Living a large life means daring to be seen, not just by others, but by yourself. It means embracing your contradictions, shadows, and potential with equal honesty. It means refusing to be defined by fear and instead choosing growth despite it. This philosophy challenges societal norms that often reward conformity and safety over risk and authenticity. It calls on us to question how much of our life is shaped by fear of what the mirror reveals and to commit to the hard work of becoming. In the end, Nietzsche reminds us that the size of our life is determined not by external circumstances, but by our willingness to face ourselves. The mirror may terrify, but it also holds the key to greatness. Only by meeting our own gaze can we break free from smallness and live with depth, courage, and meaning. Betrayal often comes from those you sheltered. This painful truth reveals a complex and paradoxical aspect of human relationships that Nietzsche understood with stark clarity. The people we protect, nurture, and trust the most, the ones we open our hearts to, sometimes become the very sources of our deepest wounds. This betrayal is particularly devastating because it arises not from strangers or enemies, but from those who once depended on us or whom we considered close. Sheltering someone implies vulnerability and responsibility. When you shelter another, you offer safety, support, and trust. You lower your defenses, believing that this bond will be reciprocated with loyalty and gratitude. But Nietzsche recognized that human nature is not always governed by gratitude or loyalty. Instead, it can be driven by complex motives, including self-interest, fear, and the struggle for power. Those you shelter may come to see your protection as weakness or a burden. They may resent the dependence or feel constrained by the relationship. In some cases, they may seek to assert their independence by breaking away abruptly, sometimes in ways that feel like betrayal. In others, they may exploit the shelter you provide, taking more than they give, or turning against you when it suits their needs. This dynamic reflects the darker side of human psychology, the tension between dependence and autonomy, gratitude and entitlement, loyalty and self-preservation. Nietzsche's philosophy does not sugarcoat these tensions, but calls for an honest reckoning with them. To shelter is to risk betrayal, but it is also an act of courage and generosity. Understanding this risk is essential to navigating relationships wisely. Moreover, betrayal by those you sheltered can feel like a profound loss of control and meaning. It challenges your sense of judgment and shakes the foundation of trust. The pain is intensified because it exposes the fragility of human bonds and the limits of our influence over others. Nietzsche saw that suffering such betrayals can be transformative, forcing us to confront illusions and grow stronger in self-reliance. At the same time, this insight warns against naive idealism. It encourages setting boundaries and cultivating discernment without closing the heart. To shelter wisely is to acknowledge human complexity, to offer help while remaining aware that those you protect have their own wills and paths, which may diverge from yours. Betrayal from those you sheltered also illustrates the theme of self-overcoming central to Nietzsche's thought. It is an opportunity to rise above victimhood and bitterness. It invites reflection on the nature of attachment, expectation, and forgiveness. It calls for embracing resilience and the capacity to rebuild without losing the generosity that made sheltering possible. In essence, Nietzsche's observation about betrayal is a call to balance openness with strength. To understand that vulnerability carries risk, but also that true power lies in facing that risk without surrender. Those you shelter may betray you, but your capacity to endure, learn, and grow defines your true character. Recognizing this paradox enriches our understanding of human relationships. It prepares us to engage with others authentically and courageously, knowing that betrayal is not just a possibility, but a profound challenge, and that meeting this challenge is part of the journey toward becoming who we truly are. Most avoid solitude because they can't survive meeting themselves. This profound observation by Nietzsche reveals a deep human fear that often goes unspoken. The fear of being alone, not just physically, but with one's own thoughts, feelings, and true self. Solitude strips away distractions, social masks, and external validation, leaving us face to face with the core of our being. For many, this encounter is so daunting that they seek constant noise, company, or busyness to avoid it. Solitude is not merely a physical state. It is a psychological and spiritual confrontation. In solitude, there is no one else to blame for our fears, failures, or dissatisfaction. There is no escape from the inner dialogue that reveals our doubts, insecurities, and contradictions. Nietzsche understood that this confrontation can feel like an abyss, an exposure to the raw, unfiltered self that most prefer to avoid. Many people fill their lives with distractions, technology, entertainment, social obligations, not just for pleasure, but to escape the silence where true self-meeting occurs. This avoidance is a survival mechanism. The mind seeks comfort and certainty, and solitude often brings discomfort and ambiguity. Meeting oneself means facing uncomfortable truths about desires unfulfilled, mistakes unowned, and potential unrealized. For those who have never developed the inner resources to endure this, solitude becomes a source of anxiety rather than peace. Nietzsche believed that to grow and become fully alive, one must learn to embrace solitude. It is in these quiet moments that the individual can reflect, create, and transform. Solitude allows for the dissolution of false identities and social conditioning, making space for authentic self-expression. The courageous use solitude not as a refuge from the world, but as a laboratory for self-overcoming. However, this process is not easy. Meeting oneself in solitude requires honesty and strength. It means confronting fears, accepting imperfections, and wrestling with existential questions without distraction. The temptation to flee is strong, but Nietzsche teaches that only through this inner confrontation can true freedom and power be attained. Avoiding solitude also perpetuates dependency on others for validation and identity. When we cannot stand alone, we rely on external approval to feel worthy. This dependence limits growth and traps us in cycles of insecurity and conformity. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to break this cycle by cultivating solitude as a practice of empowerment. Moreover, solitude sharpens creativity and clarity. Without the noise of the crowd, we hear our deepest longings and insights. Solitude fosters originality because it allows ideas to incubate away from the influence of others. Many great thinkers, artists, and leaders have found solitude essential to their work and evolution. In some, most avoid solitude because it demands facing themselves honestly, a task many find overwhelming. But Nietzsche, by his vision, encourages embracing solitude as the crucible of transformation. It is the space where one sheds illusions, gains self-knowledge, and discovers the strength to live authentically. To survive meeting oneself is not a weakness, but a profound act of courage, a necessary step toward becoming who you truly are. Mediocrity is a survival strategy. This uncomfortable truth, illuminated by Nietzsche's critical eye, reveals how settling for the ordinary is often less a failure and more a calculated choice, rooted in fear, conformity, and the instinct to endure. While society tends to celebrate exceptional achievement and greatness, the reality is that many people embrace mediocrity not because they lack potential, but because it offers a safer, more manageable path through life. To be mediocre means to blend in, to avoid standing out in ways that might provoke scrutiny, rejection, or conflict. It is the quiet acceptance of limits, both imposed and self-selected, that protects the individual from the harsh uncertainties of risk and change. Nietzsche understood that not everyone has the strength, will, or circumstances to pursue extraordinary goals, and that many consciously or unconsciously opt for mediocrity as a way to maintain stability. This survival strategy functions on multiple levels. Psychologically, mediocrity shields the individual from the anxiety of failure and the pain of striving. It offers comfort in routine, predictability in daily life, and a reprieve from the relentless pressure to excel. Socially, mediocrity aligns with collective norms and expectations, reducing friction with others and minimizing the risk of alienation. Economically, it provides a baseline of security, allowing one to meet basic needs without the volatility that often accompanies bold ambition. Nietzsche did not praise mediocrity, but he understood its allure. The fear of stepping into the unknown, of confronting one's own limitations, and of facing potential defeat can be overwhelming. Choosing mediocrity is often an act of preservation, a way to survive in a world that can be unforgiving to those who dare to challenge its boundaries. However, Nietzsche also warned of the dangers inherent in this survival strategy. Mediocrity, while protective, is ultimately limiting. It traps individuals in cycles of stagnation and complacency, preventing growth, innovation, and self-overcoming. It diminishes the human spirit by encouraging conformity over creativity and comfort over courage. In this way, mediocrity becomes not just a personal choice, but a cultural malaise that stifles progress and diminishes collective potential. Breaking free from mediocrity requires confronting fear directly and embracing the uncertainty of growth. It demands a reorientation from mere survival to flourishing, a shift from avoiding risk to pursuing meaning. Nietzsche's philosophy calls for the cultivation of strength, vision, and self-discipline to transcend the allure of safety and step into the realm of greatness. Moreover, understanding mediocrity as a survival strategy fosters compassion. It helps explain why many resist change or reject challenges, not out of laziness or apathy, but because the cost of growth feels too high. Recognizing this can guide us in creating environments that support courage and resilience rather than punishment and exclusion. Ultimately, Nietzsche's insight invites us to examine our own lives. Are we living in mediocrity as a defense, or are we willing to risk discomfort in the pursuit of something greater? Mediocrity may keep us safe, but it also keeps us small. The path to a meaningful, powerful life lies in daring to step beyond survival and embrace the challenge of becoming who we truly are. Greatness is punished before it is praised. This paradox is a recurring theme in human history and psychology, one that Nietzsche understood with remarkable clarity. Those who reach for greatness, whether in thought, art, leadership, or innovation, rarely find immediate acceptance or admiration. Instead, they often face resistance, criticism, and even persecution before their contributions are recognized and celebrated. This delay is not accidental, but rooted in the dynamics of power, fear, and conformity. Greatness disrupts. It challenges the familiar, unsettles comfortable beliefs, and threatens established hierarchies. The innovator who introduces a new idea shakes the foundation of the old. The leader who dares to change the status quo provokes opposition from those invested in maintaining it. The artist who expresses a novel vision unsettles conventions and tastes. This disruption naturally provokes fear and defensive reactions. The crowd, or the existing power structure, often reacts to greatness with suspicion and hostility. Greatness threatens the comfort of mediocrity and the security of conformity. It forces others to confront their own limitations and complacency. Rather than welcoming this challenge, many seek to suppress it through ridicule, censorship, or marginalization. Nietzsche saw this as a test of the great individual's strength and resolve. The punishment that precedes praise is thus a kind of crucible. It refines character, fortifies conviction, and separates the genuine from the superficial. Those who endure this phase demonstrate resilience and a commitment to their vision that is not dependent on external approval. Their suffering is not meaningless, but part of the process of becoming. This dynamic also explains why many revolutionary figures, philosophers, and artists were misunderstood or vilified in their lifetimes. Their ideas were too advanced or too uncomfortable for their contemporaries. Only after time, distance, and shifts in perspective did society come to appreciate their contributions. Nietzsche himself experienced this pattern of rejection before acclaim. Understanding that greatness is punished before it is praised can prepare individuals for the challenges of pursuing excellence. It offers a framework for interpreting criticism not as failure, but as a sign of impact. It encourages persistence in the face of adversity and guards against discouragement. At the same time, this insight cautions against seeking immediate validation or popularity. True greatness is often solitary and unpopular in its early stages. It requires a focus on inner values and long-term vision rather than short-term approval. Moreover, recognizing this pattern invites empathy for those who challenge norms. It reminds us that opposition to greatness often stems from fear and resistance to change, rather than rational judgment. This awareness can foster a more thoughtful response to innovation and leadership. Ultimately, Nietzsche's observation about greatness challenges us to rethink success and failure. It suggests that the path to lasting achievement is rarely smooth or celebrated from the outset. Instead, it is marked by trials, sacrifice, and a willingness to stand firm amid rejection. Greatness, in this light, is not just an accomplishment, but a journey of courage and transformation, one that requires enduring punishment before enjoying praise. True power is the ability to stay silent while being misunderstood. In a world obsessed with noise, whether it's the clamor of social media, the endless chatter of opinions, or the pressure to constantly explain and justify, Nietzsche's insight cuts deeply. Real strength isn't about dominating conversations, winning arguments, or correcting every misconception. It is about possessing the inner confidence and clarity that allow you to remain calm, composed, and unshaken even when others misinterpret or misjudge you. Silence in the face of misunderstanding is a form of sovereignty. It means you do not need external validation to affirm your identity or your values. You understand that truth and perception are not always aligned, and you accept this discrepancy without frustration or defensiveness. This acceptance is rare because most people equate silence with weakness or surrender. But Nietzsche teaches us that silence can be a strategic and powerful choice, a refusal to engage in the noise that often distorts or trivializes profound realities. The ability to stay silent while misunderstood requires immense self-mastery. It demands that you resist the urge to clarify, defend, or retaliate. It means trusting that your integrity does not depend on immediate comprehension or approval. This trust is born from deep self-knowledge and an unwavering commitment to your own path. When you can sit with misunderstanding without reacting, you demonstrate a confidence that transcends the fluctuating opinions of others. Moreover, silence can be a source of influence. It creates space for reflection and curiosity in others. When you refuse to react impulsively, you compel observers to pause and reconsider their assumptions. Silence carries a weight that words often lack. It signals control, deliberation, and strength. Nietzsche admired those who mastered this kind of presence because it disarms conflict and commands respect. Being misunderstood is inevitable, especially for those who think differently, challenge norms, or embody authenticity. Misunderstanding often arises not from ignorance but from fear or resistance to change. The silent individual accepts this as part of the journey rather than a barrier. They recognize that true communication transcends immediate comprehension and that some truths require time and patience to unfold. This philosophy challenges contemporary culture's emphasis on constant expression and immediate feedback. It invites us to embrace the power of restraint and the wisdom of listening. It encourages us to cultivate inner peace amidst external chaos, and to understand that sometimes the most profound response is no response at all. Ultimately, true power lies in this paradox, the strength to be present and unmoved even when the world misreads you. It is the ability to hold your truth silently, knowing that your worth is not diminished by misunderstanding. Nietzsche's insight reminds us that in silence there is a sovereignty that words can rarely capture, a power that is quiet, steady, and enduring. The loudest virtue is often the most hollow. This is a sharp critique that Nietzsche would readily endorse, a challenge to the performative nature of morality that dominates social and cultural life. In a world saturated with declarations of righteousness, public displays of piety, and performative acts of goodness, the substance of virtue often becomes diluted or absent altogether. The louder someone proclaims their moral superiority, the more we should question the depth and authenticity of their virtue. Loud virtue is a spectacle designed to impress, persuade, or control. It thrives on attention and validation, not on quiet integrity or genuine compassion. When virtue is broadcasted for all to see, it often becomes less about the intrinsic value of the act and more about how it positions the actor within social hierarchies. People who loudly champion certain causes or values may do so to enhance their image, secure social capital, or suppress dissent, rather than out of true conviction. Nietzsche's skepticism toward conventional morality stems from this observation. He saw that society rewards those who conform to popular moral narratives with applause and status, encouraging a kind of moral grandstanding. This loudness serves as a mask, concealing insecurities, contradictions, or even hypocrisy. The virtuous actor may be deeply flawed beneath the surface, yet their public persona shields them from scrutiny. Moreover, loud virtue can become a weapon against others. It creates divisions by labeling those who disagree as immoral or evil, thus silencing alternative perspectives. It fosters tribalism and moral policing rather than fostering genuine understanding or growth. Nietzsche would argue that this kind of virtue kills the very spirit of morality, which should be about self-overcoming and authentic living rather than virtue signaling. True virtue, by contrast, is often quiet and unassuming. It manifests in consistent actions that align with one's values, regardless of audience or reward. It does not need to announce itself because it is grounded in deep self-awareness and conviction. True virtue is tested in solitude, in the absence of applause, and in the face of temptation to compromise. It is humble because it recognizes its own imperfection and the complexity of moral life. This critique invites us to reflect on our own expressions of virtue. Are we motivated by genuine care and commitment, or by the desire to be seen and praised? Are our actions consistent when no one is watching, or do they depend on social approval? Nietzsche challenges us to move beyond the hollow noise of performative morality toward a deeper, more difficult path of integrity. In essence, the loudest virtue often reveals the greatest insecurity. It is a defensive posture that seeks external validation to compensate for internal uncertainty. Recognizing this helps us cultivate discernment, not only in judging others, but in understanding ourselves. Nietzsche's insight serves as a call to authenticity in moral life. It reminds us that true virtue is not a performance, but a lived experience. It requires courage to embody values quietly and consistently, especially when such behavior goes unnoticed or is misunderstood. Ultimately, the loudest virtue may attract the most attention, but it is the silent, steadfast virtue that shapes character and fosters real transformation. In a world full of noise, Nietzsche invites us to listen for the quiet voice of genuine goodness beneath the clamor. The world will forgive cruelty before it forgives superiority. This unsettling truth, keenly observed by Nietzsche, challenges our conventional ideas about power, acceptance, and human nature. It reveals a paradox in social dynamics. Acts of cruelty, while harsh and often condemned, are more readily tolerated or overlooked than displays of true superiority, whether intellectual, moral, or creative. Nietzsche's insight exposes the deep-rooted fear and resentment that superiority can provoke in others, and the complex ways societies react to power and difference. Cruelty, despite its brutality, is often understood through the lens of weakness or survival. When someone acts cruelly, people may rationalize it as a product of circumstance, stress, or emotional pain. They may attribute cruelty to external factors or personal struggle. This makes cruelty, paradoxically, more relatable and more forgivable. It is seen as a human failing, a lapse in compassion, but one that can be corrected, excused, or endured. Superiority, on the other hand, confronts people with something alien and unsettling. True superiority, whether it is a higher intellect, moral clarity, or exceptional talent, does not just demand respect, it challenges the self-esteem and security of others. It highlights their limitations and inadequacies. Where cruelty can be blamed on circumstance, superiority is an unapologetic statement of difference. This difference threatens the comfort of equality or mediocrity and can provoke envy, hostility, or rejection. Nietzsche recognized that superiority does not seek permission or forgiveness. It asserts itself boldly, often indifferent to popular opinion or social approval. This independence and self-assurance make superiority intolerable to many. The superior individual stands apart, refuses to conform, and does not soften their greatness to placate others. This stance can be perceived as arrogance, elitism, or even cruelty, but it is fundamentally about authenticity and self-overcoming. The world's tendency to forgive cruelty more readily than superiority reveals a deep social anxiety. It is easier to tolerate someone who harms because of pain than to tolerate someone who transcends pain altogether. Cruelty is a reminder of shared vulnerability. Superiority is a reminder of difference and potential transcendence that many fear or resent. This dynamic explains why revolutionary thinkers, artists, and leaders are often met with resistance and hostility before eventual recognition. Their superiority unsettles existing structures and challenges collective comfort. They are punished not for cruelty, but for the threat their greatness poses to the status quo. Nietzsche's insight invites reflection on our own responses to power and difference. Are we more forgiving of faults because they mirror our own struggles? Do we resist those who embody qualities we lack or fear? Recognizing this tendency can help us cultivate humility and openness, allowing us to appreciate greatness without resentment. Ultimately, the forgiveness of cruelty before superiority underscores the difficulty of true greatness. It calls for courage to maintain one's authenticity despite misunderstanding or rejection. It reminds us that superiority is a lonely path, but one that leads to self-realization and transformation beyond the reach of common tolerance. Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to rise above the pettiness of envy and fear, to see superiority not as a threat, but as an invitation to growth, and to understand that true power lies not in seeking forgiveness, but in embodying one's highest potential regardless of the world's judgments. You are not here to be liked. You are here to become. This powerful declaration by Nietzsche cuts through the social conditioning that often prioritizes approval and acceptance above all else. From a young age, many are taught to seek validation, to conform to expectations, to avoid conflict, and to mold themselves into images others find pleasing. But Nietzsche challenges this path, insisting that the ultimate purpose of existence is not to win favor or be comfortably accepted, but to evolve, to grow, and to become the fullest expression of oneself. Being liked is a natural desire rooted in our social nature. Acceptance brings safety, belonging, and affirmation. Yet the hunger for approval can become a trap. It encourages people to suppress their true thoughts, feelings, and ambitions in order to maintain harmony or avoid rejection. Over time, this leads to a fragmented self, one that is shaped more by external expectations than by inner truth. Nietzsche warns that this pursuit of being liked often results in mediocrity, stagnation, and loss of authenticity. To become, on the other hand, is an inward journey. It is about self-overcoming, the continual process of challenging and transcending one's limitations, fears, and inherited beliefs. Becoming requires courage, because it often involves standing apart from the crowd, risking misunderstanding, and confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself. It is an act of creation where the individual crafts their own identity and values rather than inheriting or borrowing them. Nietzsche's philosophy emphasizes that becoming is a dynamic, lifelong process. It is not a destination, but a path marked by struggle, growth, and transformation. It demands resilience in the face of failure, honesty in self-reflection, and a willingness to embrace solitude. Those who prioritize becoming understand that being liked is transient and superficial, while true selfhood is enduring and profound. This perspective challenges the modern obsession with popularity, social media validation, and the fear of being disliked. It calls for a reevaluation of what matters in life. Are we willing to risk rejection and discomfort for the sake of growth? Or do we prefer the safety of conformity and approval at the cost of our potential? Moreover, Nietzsche's insight invites compassion for ourselves and others. Recognizing that the desire to be liked is natural allows us to understand the struggles of those who cling to approval. Yet it also encourages us to support each other's journeys toward becoming, even when it means facing conflict or alienation. Ultimately, you are not here to fit into others' expectations or to accumulate their approval. You are here to become an individual of strength, creativity, and integrity. This path may be lonely and challenging, but it is the path to genuine freedom and fulfillment. Nietzsche's call is clear. Embrace your becoming and let go of the need to be liked. In doing so, you claim your true power and destiny. Those who preach morality the loudest usually hide the most. This piercing insight by Nietzsche cuts through the facades of virtue signaling and moral grandstanding to reveal a paradox at the heart of human behavior. The louder someone proclaims their righteousness, the more likely they are compensating for inner contradictions, insecurities, or hidden faults. Their loud morality serves as a shield, a performance designed to distract attention from what they seek to conceal. Public displays of moral superiority often function as a form of psychological armor. By broadcasting their virtues, individuals attempt to control how others perceive them, seeking admiration, respect, or dominance. This performative morality masks vulnerabilities, fear of judgment, guilt over past actions, or unresolved inner conflicts. Nietzsche saw this as a defensive mechanism. The louder the proclamation, the greater the internal turmoil. The paradox lies in the dissonance between external virtue and internal reality. Those who genuinely embody moral excellence rarely need to announce it. True virtue is quiet and consistent. It manifests in actions rather than speeches. It withstands scrutiny without defensiveness and requires no validation from others. Nietzsche revered this authentic strength, contrasting it with the noisy self-righteousness that seeks external approval. Moreover, loud moralizing can be manipulative. It exerts pressure on others to conform, silences dissent, and establishes hierarchies under the guise of ethical authority. This use of morality as a weapon reveals the preacher's insecurity and need for control. It turns morality from a personal quest for goodness into a social tool for power. This dynamic is evident throughout history and daily life. Leaders who demand absolute loyalty often hide personal failings. Critics who harshly judge others may avoid facing their own shortcomings. Religious, political, or social figures who loudly proclaim moral certitude sometimes harbor hypocrisy or moral blindness. Nietzsche's critique encourages skepticism toward grandiose moral claims and invites us to look deeper. Understanding that those who preach morality the loudest usually hide the most also prompts introspection. It challenges us to examine our own motives. Are our moral expressions sincere reflections of our values, or are they shields against insecurity? Are we comfortable with humility and self-examination, or do we feel compelled to defend an image? Nietzsche's insight fosters a more nuanced view of morality. It encourages valuing authenticity over performance, depth over spectacle, and self-awareness over judgment. It reminds us that genuine morality begins within and is sustained by courage to face our own imperfections. Ultimately, this philosophy warns against taking moral declarations at face value. It calls for discernment and compassion, recognizing that loud proclamations often signal hidden struggles. By looking beyond the noise, we can find true virtue in ourselves and others that does not need to shout to be heard. In a decaying world, the honest become dangerous. This stark observation captures a profound reality about societies in decline and the role of truthfulness within them. Nietzsche's philosophy reveals that when the moral, cultural, or structural foundations of a society erode, those who speak honestly, unflinchingly, unapologetically, and without compromise are perceived not as heroes, but as threats. Their honesty disrupts the fragile illusions that sustain decay, making them dangerous to those invested in maintaining the status quo. A decaying world is characterized by widespread hypocrisy, corruption, and moral confusion. The structures that once upheld order and meaning become hollow or corrupt. In such an environment, people often cling desperately to comforting lies, convenient narratives, and surface-level appearances. These falsehoods create a veneer of stability, masking the underlying rot. Honest voices which pierce through the facade expose uncomfortable truths that many would rather ignore. Honesty in this context is dangerous because it threatens the delicate balance of denial and deception. The honest individual forces society to confront realities, failures, injustices, contradictions that undermine its legitimacy. This confrontation unsettles those who benefit from or are complicit in decay, triggering defensive reactions. The honest are labeled troublemakers, radicals, or enemies because they challenge the collective self-deception that sustains decline. Nietzsche understood that the honest do not set out to be dangerous. Rather, their commitment to truth naturally places them at odds with a world unwilling to face itself. Their clarity and courage become acts of rebellion against decay. Yet this rebellion comes at a cost. The honest often face isolation, persecution, or marginalization. They may be misunderstood or vilified precisely because their honesty disrupts comfortable lies. Moreover, honesty in a decaying world demands exceptional strength. It requires the willingness to endure discomfort, conflict, and rejection. It demands resilience in the face of widespread apathy or hostility. Nietzsche admired this strength, viewing it as a sign of authenticity and power. The honest do not seek popularity, they seek truth, and that pursuit is inherently risky in a world falling apart. This philosophy also challenges us to reflect on our own relationship with honesty. Are we willing to speak truth when it is inconvenient or unpopular? Do we prioritize comfort over clarity? Recognizing the danger honest voices face in decay encourages us to support courage and integrity rather than silence or complicity. At the same time, Nietzsche's insight offers hope. The presence of honest individuals signals that not all is lost. Even in decay, truth persists and has the power to inspire renewal. The danger the honest pose to decay is also the danger decay poses to itself, the possibility of transformation through confrontation and awakening. Ultimately, in a decaying world, honesty is a radical act. It is a spark that can ignite change or provoke backlash. Nietzsche's philosophy calls for embracing this danger, not shying away from truth but wielding it with courage. Because only through honesty can decay be recognized, confronted, and ultimately overcome. The truth has no friends, only consequences. This stark statement captures a profound reality about the nature of truth and its place in human life and society. Nietzsche understood that truth is not a comforting companion or a social ally. It is an uncompromising force that exists independently of our desires, relationships, or beliefs. It does not seek approval, offer comfort, or curry favor. Instead, truth reveals itself as a relentless source of consequences, sometimes liberating, often challenging, and always transformative. Truth is fundamentally indifferent to human preferences. People often wish for truths that align with their hopes, validate their worldviews, or soothe their fears. But truth does not negotiate. It does not bend to make us feel better or to preserve illusions. It confronts us with reality as it is, regardless of whether we like what we see. This indifference can make truth seem harsh or even cruel, especially when it dismantles cherished beliefs or exposes uncomfortable facts. Because truth is indifferent and uncompromising, it often stands alone, without friends or advocates. Those who embrace truth must frequently do so against the tide of social pressure, denial, or misinformation. Truth-tellers may find themselves isolated, misunderstood, or opposed precisely because their commitment to reality challenges collective comfort or convenience. Nietzsche saw this solitude of truth as both a burden and a sign of its power. The consequences of truth are unavoidable and profound. Accepting truth can lead to freedom, growth, and authenticity, but it can also bring conflict, loss, and upheaval. For instance, discovering a painful personal truth might end relationships or require significant life changes. Revealing inconvenient social truths can provoke backlash, censorship, or persecution. Yet these consequences are the price of engaging honestly with the world. Nietzsche's insight challenges the common misconception that truth is inherently good or benevolent. Truth itself is neutral. It is the human response to truth that shapes its moral valence. Embracing truth demands courage to face consequences without retreat or denial. It requires a readiness to endure discomfort, to question deeply held assumptions, and to accept responsibility for the changes that truth demands. This philosophy also invites reflection on our relationship with truth in everyday life. Do we seek truth for its own sake, or only when it aligns with our desires? Are we willing to accept the consequences of truth, or do we cling to comforting falsehoods? Recognizing that truth has no friends encourages us to cultivate resilience and integrity. Moreover, understanding the consequential nature of truth fosters humility. It reminds us that truth is complex and multifaceted, often revealing layers that require ongoing examination. It warns against simplistic or dogmatic claims of absolute truth, emphasizing instead the ongoing journey of discovery. Ultimately, Nietzsche's assertion that the truth has no friends, only consequences, calls us to a deeper engagement with reality. It urges us to value truth not for its popularity, but for its power to reveal, challenge, and transform. In accepting this, we find the path to genuine freedom and self-mastery, recognizing that while truth may stand alone, it leads us toward the most authentic life possible.